What if the most decorated war hero of the Great War wasn't a dashing general or a fearless soldier, but a chicken? A humble, feathered creature drafted into the chaos and somehow surviving? Tonight we won't unravel that incredible, possibly apocryphal tale. Instead, we will find our peace in the slow, deliberate rhythm of a simpler story. The life of a single hen, a creature of habit, of dust baths and sunrise clucks, whose existence was, until one fateful day, entirely uneventful. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Snooze Stories for more peaceful narratives. Set the mood, now dim the lights. Let's drift away to the sleepy village of Epernay, France, in the year 1916. Imagine the scent of freshly turned earth, the low murmur of contented cows, and the gentle pecking of a small, brown hen named Henriette, completely unaware of the thunder that was soon to disturb her tranquil existence. This is her story, the story of the chicken who, almost by accident, became a symbol of, well, we'll let the story unfold. The sun, a hazy orange orb, crept over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pastels of pink and gold. Henrietta, a Rhode Island red hen of discerning tastes and a surprisingly independent spirit, stirred in her nest of straw. The scent of damp earth and morning dew filled her nostrils, a familiar comfort. A low rumble, the contented sigh of a sleeping cow, drifted from the nearby pasture. The air was still, carrying only the faintest whisper of a breeze, rustling through the leaves of the ancient oak that stood sentinel over the farmyard. Henrietta stretched her neck, her feathers the color of burnished copper catching the first rays of sunlight. She felt the rough texture of the straw beneath her, a comforting scratch against her warm skin. The gentle weight of her eggs, 5 plum treasures nestled beneath her, gave her a sense of quiet satisfaction. Motherhood, she'd found, was a surprisingly soothing occupation. She hopped down from her nest, her claws softly scratching the wooden floor of the coop. The wood was worn smooth from years of use, its surface etched with the faint impressions of countless feathered bodies. The scent of wood shavings mingled with the earthy aroma of chicken droppings was both familiar and strangely comforting. A low clucking sound escaped her throat, a greeting to the other hens in the coop. These were her flock, her companions in this peaceful existence. There was Mathilde, a plump Orpington hen with feathers as soft as down. Suzanne, a nervous little leghorn, perpetually pecking at imaginary threats. And old Marguerite, a wise Plymouth Rock hen whose slow, deliberate movements spoke of years spent basking in the sun and contemplating the intricacies of worm finding. Each had their own peculiarities, their own quiet rhythm. Henrietta found solace in their company, a sense of belonging in their shared existence. Outside, the farm was slowly awakening. The rhythmic creak of the barn door as Farmer Dubois began his morning chores filled the air. The bleating of lambs, the lowing of cows, the distant crow of a rooster, all were familiar sounds, the soundtrack to Henrietta's life. They were the gentle notes of a symphony of rural existence, a melody of peace and tranquility. Henrietta stepped out into the sun-drenched farmyard, her claws sinking lightly into the soft earth. The ground was cool and moist beneath her feet. She felt the warmth of the sun on her feathers, a gentle caress that loosened her muscles and eased away the sleepiness. She pecked at a stray grain of wheat left behind from the previous day's harvest, its dry texture a contrast to the dewy grass. She spent the morning foraging, her keen eyes scanning the ground for juicy worms and plump insects. The taste of the earth, mingled with the sweet juices of the worms, was a delicious reward for her efforts. The sun warmed her feathers, drying the dew clinging to the grass. She felt a sense of contentment, a quiet joy in the simple act of living. This was her life, a life of routine, of gentle rhythms, of the simple pleasures found in the everyday. The midday sun beat down, the air shimmering with heat. Henrietta sought the shade of the oak tree, the cool darkness a relief from the sun's intensity. She nestled into the shade, her breath slowing, her body relaxing. She closed her eyes, allowing the gentle breeze to rustle through her feathers. The world faded away, replaced by the rhythm of her own breathing, the soft sound of rustling leaves, the hum of bees buzzing lazily among the flowers. She spent the afternoon dusting herself in a shallow depression in the earth, the fine particles of soil soothing her skin. The dry, earthy scent filled her nostrils, another comforting aroma in this quiet haven. She watched a butterfly, its wings a kaleidoscope of colors, flitting among the wildflowers. The sight filled her with a sense of peace, a quiet acceptance of the beauty in the simplest of things. As evening approached, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, purple, and gold. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the farmhouse chimney. Henrietta returned to the co-op, her day's work done, her body tired but content. She settled into her nest, the familiar warmth of her eggs beneath her, and drifted off to sleep, the gentle sounds of the farm lulling her into a peaceful slumber. The world outside was fading into silence, leaving behind only the quiet rhythm of her breathing, a gentle pulse in the quiet heart of the countryside. Her life, for now, remained a tapestry woven with threads of sun, earth, and the quiet contentment of a simple existence. A life completely unaware of the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, clouds that held the potential to disrupt her tranquil world in ways she could scarcely imagine. The quiet rhythm of her breathing, a gentle pulse in the quiet heart of the countryside, was interrupted only by the distant, muted sounds of the village. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the air, a subtle shift in the usual hum of rural life. It began subtly, like the first whisper of wind through the tall grasses of the meadow. One morning, Farmer Dubois, his face etched with a gravity Henrietta had never before witnessed, received a letter. The paper, crisp and official-looking, crackled slightly as he unfolded it, the sound oddly amplified in the stillness of the farmhouse kitchen. He read it slowly, his lips moving as he deciphered the words. Henrietta, observing from the doorway, noted the tightening of his jaw, the furrow of his brow. The familiar scent of coffee and wood smoke mingled with a new, unfamiliar odor, the sharp, slightly metallic tang of anxiety. The following days saw small, almost imperceptible changes. The usual cheerful banter between Farmer Dubois and his wife, Madame Dubois, was muted, replaced by hushed conversations carried on in low tones. The laughter of their children, usually a bright, ringing sound that echoed through the farmyard, seemed quieter, more subdued. The rhythmic swing of Farmer Dubois' scythe as he mowed the hay was less vigorous, the strokes shorter, slower, as if weighed down by an unseen burden. Even the sun seemed to hold a different light, a pale, almost watery quality that reflected the uncertainty hanging over the farm. The news, when it finally arrived, was carried on the wind, like dandelion seeds scattered across the fields. It came in snatches of conversation overheard during the weekly trips to the village, in hushed whispers between neighbors exchanging baskets of eggs and vegetables at the market. It was a murmur, a collective breath held in anticipation that spoke of a great conflict brewing across the ocean, a war that was already casting its long shadow over their peaceful existence. The usual jovial atmosphere of the village gatherings transformed. The lively chatter was replaced by a low hum of anxiety. Faces once ruddy and full of life now bore a thin, drawn look. The laughter, once spontaneous and unrestrained, was strained, almost forced. The familiar aroma of freshly baked bread and roasting meat was mingled with the pungent scent of fear, a metallic tang that hung in the air, thick and heavy like a summer storm. Henrietta, within her familiar world of the co-op, registered these changes through her senses. The rhythmic pecking of her companions became less confident, more hesitant. The usual boisterous squabbles over scraps of food were less frequent, replaced by a nervous quiet. The air, once vibrant with the life of the farm, now carried a faint tremor, a subtle vibration of uncertainty. The familiar sounds, the bleating of lambs, the lowing of cows, the crowing of the rooster, seemed muted, less vibrant, as if muffled by a thick blanket of apprehension. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath. The rich, fertile soil, usually teeming with life, felt different beneath her claws, harder, drier, less yielding. The usual abundance of worms and insects seemed to have diminished, as if nature itself were holding back, sensing the looming threat. The sweet scent of wildflowers, usually so intoxicating, was now faint, almost imperceptible, overwhelmed by a pervasive undercurrent of fear. Even the taste of the food changed. The juicy worms, once a source of delicious satisfaction, now seemed less flavorful, less succulent. The grains of wheat, once a comforting staple, felt dry and dusty in her beak. Even the cool, moist earth, her usual haven, felt less comforting, less nurturing. It was as if the very essence of her world had been subtly altered, imbued with a subtle, pervasive fear that she couldn't quite comprehend. The evening sky, once painted in vibrant hues of orange, purple, and gold, now took on a somber, muted palette. The gentle breeze that rustled through the leaves carried not only the scent of wood smoke from the farmhouse chimney, but also a new, unfamiliar odor, the faint, metallic scent of distant gunfire, a ghostly echo of a world far away. Henrietta, nestled in the warmth of her nest, her eggs providing a comforting weight against her body, felt a growing unease. The familiar sounds of the farm, once her lullaby, now carried a disquieting undercurrent of anxiety. The quiet rhythm of her breathing, once a symbol of peace and tranquility, was now accompanied by a subtle tremor of fear, a premonition of a world about to change. The gentle pulse of her life, once so steady and predictable, began to quicken, responding to the subtle tremors in the fabric of her world. The whispers of war, carried on the wind, had reached even the quiet heart of the countryside. The storm clouds, gathering on the horizon, were no longer distant specters. They were casting their shadow long and dark over her simple life. The familiar comfort of her eggs, the soft wood of her coop, the reassuring presence of her flock, even these couldn't entirely mask the subtle chill of fear that had seeped into her very being. The world she knew was changing, irrevocably, silently, and she felt it in the subtle shift of the air, in the dryness of the earth, in the quiet anxieties of her feathered companion. The peaceful symphony of rural life was beginning to unravel, its gentle notes slowly replaced by the dissonant whispers of war. The tremor intensified. It wasn't just a feeling in Henrietta's breast, a premonition of change, but a palpable shift in the very fabric of her existence. The familiar rhythm of the farm, the comforting predictability of dawn and dusk, began to unravel. The usual morning chorus of roosters, normally a boisterous fanfare announcing the start of a new day, was muted, hesitant. The sun, still pale and watery, cast elongated shadows that stretched and distorted familiar shapes. The scent of dew-kissed grass was overwhelmed by the sharp tang of something new, a metallic scent clinging to the air, hinting at the distant conflict. Then came the notice. It wasn't dramatic, it lacked the flourish of a formal decree, the bold pronouncements of a king's edict. It arrived not with a fanfare of trumpets, but with the quiet, unassuming thud of a piece of parchment dropped onto the worn wooden table of Farmer McGregor's kitchen. It was tucked into an otherwise unremarkable envelope, bearing the dull, grayish-brown hue of government-issued stationery, its markings indistinct, yet somehow weighty with an unspoken significance. The paper itself felt thin and brittle under Farmer McGregor's calloused fingers. The ink, a faded shade of Prussian blue, seemed almost reluctant to cling to the page, as if even the ink itself sensed the absurdity of its message. Henrietta, perched on her roost, watched him from the corner of her eye. The faint scent of linseed oil, usually a comforting smell associated with the upkeep of the coop, couldn't quite mask the pungent odor of fear that clung to the farmer. His hands, usually steady and sure as he tended to his animals, trembled slightly as he unfolded the notice. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the nervous clucking of the hens and the lowing of a distant cow. The words themselves, though written in a stiff official hand, were surprisingly mundane. They spoke of quotas and contributions, of the nation's urgent need of essential resources and war effort. The bureaucratic language was a maze of convoluted clauses and baffling jargon. It spoke of poultry provisions and avian mobilization, phrases that seemed almost comical in their detachment from the reality of a Rhode Island red hen's simple existence. The tone was that of a detached accountant, meticulously documenting a transaction rather than the conscription of a living creature. There was no hint of remorse, no apology for the disruption to Henrietta's peaceful routine, only the cold, impersonal efficiency of wartime bureaucracy. The farmer reread the notice, his brow furrowed in a mixture of bewilderment and concern. He traced the words with a blunt finger, as if trying to decipher some hidden code. He muttered to himself, his voice low and indistinct, punctuated by occasional sighs of disbelief. The words, mandatory contribution, repeated themselves in his mind, each syllable a hammer blow against the tranquil rhythms of farm life. The absurdity of it all, a chicken, a humble egg-layer, drafted into the service of a nation at war, was palpable. He looked up at Henrietta, his gaze lingering on her, a strange mixture of sympathy and helplessness in his eyes. The usual warmth in his gaze was replaced by a hesitant uncertainty. He ran his hand through his thinning gray hair, pushing it back with a frustrated gesture. The scent of pipe tobacco, usually a comforting aroma associated with evenings by the fire, was tinged with the acrid odor of his anxiety. The process, detailed in excruciating detail, required the farmer to fill out multiple forms, each one more confusing than the last. There were sections for avian identification number, estimated egg-laying capacity, and projected plumage deterioration. The forms were dense with indecipherable acronyms and seemingly arbitrary calculations. They required him to specify Henrietta's breed, weight, age, and a thorough description of her plumage. The meticulous nature of the document, the absurd level of detail demanded, served only to highlight the absurdity of the situation. It was as if the very act of drafting a hen had been treated with the same serious attention as the mobilization of an army division. The bureaucratic wheels, slow and ponderous even in times of peace, seemed to have accelerated with frightening speed, propelled by the urgency of the war effort. Farmer McGregor sat at his table, surrounded by stacks of forms and official-looking papers, the weight of the paperwork a stark contrast to the lightness of the chicken he was being forced to register. The muted tones of the government-issued parchment created a stark contrast against the lively colors of the kitchen, the deep red of the earthenware bowls, the bright yellow of the butter churn. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to echo the relentless march of time, a steady counterpoint to the chaos brewing in the farmer's heart. The scratching of his pen on paper, the rustling of the forms, the quiet sighs of frustration, these were the sounds that now filled the kitchen, replacing the usual cheerful sounds of farm life. Henrietta, watching from her perch, felt the weight of these sounds, the palpable sense of unease that permeated the air. The familiar comfort of the coop, the warmth of the sun filtering through the cracks in the wooden walls, seemed far away, distant as the battlefields that had already claimed so many lives. The metallic scent of distant gunfire seemed closer now, somehow more real. The familiar earthy smell of her coop no longer offered solace, replaced by the sharp tang of bureaucratic oppression. The taste of the grain, once a source of simple pleasure, now held a strange, unsettling aftertaste, a bitter echo of the changing world around her. The world outside her coop was no longer the one she knew. It was different now, irrevocably changed, and the change had reached her, even within her simple coop. The notice had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The scratching of Farmer McGregor's pen ceased. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, a tangible thing pressing down on Henrietta. She shifted on her perch, the rough texture of the wood familiar, yet strangely uncomforting now. The scent of pine, usually so soothing, was muted, overshadowed by the lingering, metallic tang of fear that had seeped into the very fabric of the coop. It clung to the air, a thin film coating everything, the straw bedding, the wooden walls, even her own feathers. A faint, high-pitched squeak escaped her. It was a sound born not of distress, but of bewilderment, a tiny, almost inaudible tremor in the otherwise silent kitchen. The squeak echoed softly in the confined space of the coop, a tiny ripple in the stillness. It was absorbed by the rough-hewn timbers, swallowed by the quietude. Outside, the wind sighed through the nearby trees, a low whisper that seemed to carry the weight of the world. Each gust rustled the leaves, creating a delicate, almost musical susurrus that did little to dispel the pervasive unease. The familiar sounds of the farm, the clucking of her fellow hens, the lowing of the distant cow, were present, yet seemed distant, muffled, as if heard through a thick fog. They were sounds dulled, softened, almost ethereal. Henrietta closed her eyes, attempting to filter out the unfamiliar sensations assaulting her senses. She focused on the familiar texture of her feathers, smooth against her skin, a comforting counterpoint to the unsettling strangeness of the situation. The sun, though still visible through the cracks in the wooden wall, seemed to have lost some of its warmth. Its rays felt weaker, less vibrant, as if filtered through a veil of anxiety. The smell of the grain in her trough, usually a potent and inviting aroma, now seemed stale, almost rancid. Its usual comforting sweetness was replaced by a subtle, bitter undertone that mirrored the anxiety in the air. The familiar taste of the grain, so recently a simple pleasure, now felt gritty and unappetizing, leaving an odd metallic aftertaste on her tongue. She pecked tentatively at the grain, her beak finding purchase on a single kernel. The sensation was dull, almost numb. The usual satisfying crunch was absent, replaced by a soft, almost hesitant giving way. The texture was altered, strangely lifeless, echoing the strange numbness that had settled upon her. She shifted again, her claws digging into the rough wood of her perch. The tactile sensation, usually a grounding element, offered little comfort now. The familiar wood felt coarse, almost abrasive against her feet. The usually comforting weight of her body on the perch felt heavy, burdensome. The farmer's movements were now slow, deliberate. The rustling of the papers, the scratching of his pen, these sounds, once part of the normal rhythm of farm life, now felt ominous, each scrape and rustle a reminder of the approaching disruption. He sighed again, the sound barely audible, yet it vibrated through the wooden floor, a tremor reaching deep into her very bones. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, a relentless beat that had always provided a steady rhythm to her existence, now seemed accelerated, each tick a small hammer blow against the fragile piece of the co-op. The rhythm was unchanged, but the perception was entirely altered. It felt faster, more insistent. It marked not the passage of time, but the closing in of a future unknown, unsettling and filled with a dread she couldn't quite grasp. Henrietta felt the weight of the farmer's gaze upon her, a heavy, palpable thing. It was not the usual, gentle, affectionate look, but something heavy, burdened with a sorrow that echoed her own growing unease. It was the look of someone forced to betray a trust, a silent apology for the impending change. She tried to focus on the familiar sounds, the subtle creaks and groans of the old wooden coop, the gentle rustling of leaves outside, the distant caw of a crow. She tried to ground herself in these familiar sensory details, to find solace in the routine of her life. But it was no use. The sharp tang of impending change, the metallic scent of fear, hung heavy in the air, clinging to everything, irrevocably altering even the simplest sensory perceptions. The world, once simple, was now a confusing maze of sounds, smells, and textures that held the promise of something entirely new and, as yet, entirely unknown. The quiet of the coop was no longer a sanctuary, it was a waiting room. The weight of the farmer's gaze remained, a physical presence in the small cope. Farmer McGregor, a man whose hands were as rough as the bark of the old oak at the edge of his property, lifted a calloused finger to trace the outline of Henrietta's comb. The touch was light, almost hesitant, as if fearing to disturb the delicate balance of the moment. His breath hitched, a soft, barely audible sigh escaping his lips, a sound lost almost immediately in the quiet of the cope. He smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and wood smoke, a scent usually comforting, now tinged with an undercurrent of something indefinable, something akin to despair. The faintest tremor ran through his broad shoulders, a subtle indication of the internal battle raging within him. He lowered his hand, the silence stretching, becoming a tangible entity filling the space between them. The ticking of the grandfather clock continued its relentless march, each tick a tiny hammer blow against the fragile piece. The rhythmic creak of the old wooden coop seemed to amplify the silence, each groan a low whisper in the hushed atmosphere. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight filtering through the cracks in the wall, their slow, languid drift a counterpoint to the stillness. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of hay and earth, a smell usually redolent of life and growth, now tinged with the metallic tang of fear. His eyes, usually bright and twinkling with a mischievous glint, were clouded with a profound sadness. He ran a hand through his thinning gray hair, the gesture slow and deliberate, each movement laden with the weight of his decision. The rustling of the papers in his hand, the official draft notice, created a soft, almost apologetic whisper. The crispness of the parchment felt brittle against his fingers, a stark contrast to the rough texture of the wood of the coupe. He studied the fine print, his lips moving silently, as if tracing the words with his tongue. The faint scent of ink, usually sharp and clean, seemed muted, dull, almost overwhelmed by the heavier scent of his unspoken anxieties. The lowing of the distant cow, a sound that normally soothed him, only served to amplify the feeling of isolation. The rhythmic clucking of Henrietta's fellow hens, usually a comforting chorus, seemed distant and muted, almost lost in the suffocating quiet. He shifted his weight, the floorboards groaning softly under his considerable mass, a sound that mirrored the weight of his decision. The familiar weight of his worn leather boots felt heavy, burdensome, as if each step carried the full weight of his responsibility. He was a man of simple pleasures, a man of the land, a man bound to his routines and his animals. This call, this unexpected summons to war, to send a part of his life, his very livelihood, to fight across an ocean, felt utterly alien and wrong. He looked down at Henrietta, her small form hunched on her perch, a picture of quiet bewilderment. He saw not just a hen, but a reflection of his own predicament, a creature of habit, simple in her needs, yet profoundly affected by the changes swirling around her. He saw the quiet acceptance in her eyes, the absence of fear, replaced with a quiet confusion mirroring his own turmoil. He felt a surge of guilt, a sharp pang of regret that he had not yet found a way to spare her. He wished for a moment to escape the crushing weight of his responsibility, to find solace in the familiar rhythm of farm life. The rising sun, the setting sun, the rhythmic routines, the simple pleasures. He fingered the draft notice once more, the official seal a stark symbol of the relentless machinery of war. He could comply, he could send Henrietta, fulfilling his duty however unjust it felt, to provide what was asked of him, however unnatural, however cruelly ironic the request. Or he could refuse, risking the consequences, facing the wrath of authorities, bearing the weight of disobedience, the consequences uncertain and fraught with peril. The silence in the coupe intensified, a heavy blanket that suffocated him, a pressure that made his chest ache. He could feel the cold sweat prickling his brow. The familiar scent of the coupe, the comforting smell of hay, of wood, of earth, felt stifling, like being trapped in an inescapable cage. The weight of his responsibility pressed down on him, crushing him under the burden of choice. Each breath felt like a burden, each heartbeat a hammer against his ribs. He knew the decision would have repercussions either way. To comply meant betraying a trust, a bond he had nurtured over years. To disobey could mean the loss of his farm, his livelihood, his very freedom. The tick-tock of the clock became a relentless reminder of the dwindling time he had to make his decision. The simple, earthy sounds of the farm, the comforting routine of his days, now felt distant, almost surreal. They were a memory of a life that was slipping away, replaced by the cold, harsh reality of war. He ran his hand across Henrietta's soft feathers once more, the gesture slow and deliberate. It was not simply a hen he touched, but the embodiment of his dilemma, a reflection of his own struggle. The quiet sigh escaping his lips held the weight of the world, a silent testament to the agonizing choices that war demands, even from those furthest removed from the battlefield. The weight of his decision lay heavy upon him, a silent burden carried in the quiet of the co-op, as the metallic tang of dread remained inescapable, a finality as pervasive as the ever-present ticking of the clock. He finally nodded, a minute movement barely perceptible amidst the stillness of the coupe. The decision, heavy and irreversible, settled upon him like a shroud. He reached for the small woven basket he had prepared, its straw lining soft against his calloused fingers. The faint scent of dried lavender intended to soothe Henrietta hung in the air, a fragile counterpoint to the metallic tang of dread that permeated the space. He carefully lifted Henrietta, her warm weight surprisingly comforting against his palm. Her feathers, soft and downy, felt like a whisper against his skin. He could feel the gentle thrum of her heartbeat against his hand, a steady rhythm in the face of the impending chaos. The journey began before dawn. The air was still, cool, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil and the faintest hint of wood smoke from a distant farmhouse. The farmer, his gait slow and deliberate, walked towards the waiting truck, its dark form silhouetted against the pre-dawn gloom. The rough-hewn wood of the truck bed, still damp with morning dew, felt cool under his hand as he gently placed Henrietta's basket inside. He arranged a soft bed of hay, carefully tucking it around her basket, ensuring she was secure and comfortable. The rhythmic squeak of the truck's wooden wheels, the slight tremor of the engine starting, formed a low drone in the quiet morning. The sky began to lighten, the colors soft and muted, pastel shades of pink and orange slowly bleeding into the deep blue of the pre-dawn sky. The journey was long and slow. The rhythmic rumbling of the truck, the gentle sway of the vehicle, created a lulling sensation. Henrietta remained surprisingly calm, her soft clucks a low murmur against the sounds of the road. The farmer occasionally glanced at her basket, his gaze lingering for a moment before returning to the road ahead. The landscape changed gradually, the familiar fields and rolling hills of Rhode Island slowly giving way to the vast expanse of the American countryside. He passed small towns and villages, their sleepy streets still quiet and undisturbed by the day's rush. He saw the occasional flash of sunlight glinting off a distant river, the slow, deliberate movement of farm machinery in the fields, the silent contemplation of grazing cattle. All these sights were a poignant reminder of the world he was leaving behind, a world that seemed both distant and impossibly close, a dream fading into the harsh reality of war. The smells changed too. The clean scent of his own farm gave way to the richer smells of industry, the sharp tang of exhaust fumes mingling with the sweet scent of wildflowers blooming by the roadside. He smelled the metallic scent of train tracks and passing freight cars, the distant hint of coal smoke hanging in the air, the subtle tang of brine from a nearby coastal town. The sights and sounds of the road, normally a source of annoyance, now seemed to blur into a calming monotone, almost hypnotic in their regularity. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the road. The temperature gradually warmed, the morning chill giving way to the gentle heat of the day. Henrietta occasionally stirred within her basket, her soft peeping a barely audible sound against the drone of the truck's engine. The farmer paused at infrequent intervals, checking on her, his movements slow and careful, his actions marked by a quiet tenderness that belied the somber task at hand. He offered her a few drops of water from his canteen, the metal cool against his lips, the water refreshing in the increasing heat. He felt the rough texture of his canteen against his hand, the faint scent of metal and slightly damp cloth, a stark contrast to the softness of Henrietta's feathers. As the day wore on, the countryside gave way to a more industrial landscape. Factories and warehouses appeared on the horizon, their stark lines a jarring contrast to the gentle curves of the fields. The air grew heavier, thick with the smells of industry, the scent of coal smoke, of oil, and of metal. The rhythmic drone of the truck was occasionally punctuated by the distant blasts of factory whistles, the sharp clang of metal on metal, the low rumble of passing trains. The sights and sounds were a cacophony, a stark contrast to the quietude of the farm, a constant reminder of the world he was leaving behind. Yet even in this harsh industrial landscape, there were pockets of calm. He saw a small patch of wildflowers blooming bravely beside a factory wall, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the surrounding gray. He caught the distant glimpse of a child playing in a small yard, their laughter a faint sweet sound against the background noise. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at the staging area. It was a vast expanse of tents and trucks, a temporary city teeming with activity. Soldiers marched in formation, their boots pounding on the dusty ground. The air buzzed with a nervous energy, a palpable sense of anticipation. The farmer carefully lifted Henrietta's basket from the truck, her slight weight strangely reassuring in the chaos of the surroundings. The ground beneath his boots was hard and dusty, the air thick with the smells of sweat, of dust, and of unwashed bodies. He moved slowly, deliberately, his steps measured, his actions careful and precise, as if trying to maintain a small pocket of calm amidst the growing storm. He could feel the weight of his decision, the weight of Henrietta's fate, pressing down on him, a constant reminder of the heavy burden he carried. He placed the basket gently on the designated area, his movements slow and careful, his gaze lingering for a moment before he turned and walked away, the sounds of the staging area fading into the background as he began his long journey home. The weight of his decision remained, but the immediate burden of his responsibility, at least, was over. The air hung heavy, thick with the dust stirred up by countless boots and the exhaust fumes of idling trucks. A low, persistent hum vibrated through the ground, a symphony of distant shouts, the rhythmic clang of metal, and the bleating of sheep. The farmer's departure left Henrietta alone, the soft peeping sounds she made swallowed by the cacophony. The basket felt strangely still, the slight swaying motion of the truck replaced by the jarring stillness of the ground. He had placed her near a large canvas tent, its faded green suggesting years of use and countless occupants. Nearby, a smaller tent, a stark white against the dusty brown earth, seemed to hold a different kind of cargo. Faint, almost imperceptible sounds emanated from within, a soft rustling, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, and a sporadic, rhythmic squeaking. Peeking cautiously through the woven gaps in her basket, Henrietta saw a vast expanse of similar tents, a city of temporary dwellings stretching as far as the eye could see. Animals, a bewildering array of them, were everywhere. Beyond the white tent, a collection of sturdy wooden crates held a multitude of rabbits, their nervous twitching visible even from a distance, of their soft, almost inaudible whimpers. A chorus of apprehension blended with the other sounds, creating a strange, unsettling harmony. Closer to her basket, a group of goats, their coats the color of sun-bleached sand, were tethered together, their restless movements a constant scraping against the parched earth. The pungent smell of their sweat and hay mingled with the sharp tang of the dust, creating a scent that was both earthy and strangely acrid. Their bleating, more insistent than the rabbits' whimpers, added a sharp counterpoint to the overall soundscape. Each bleat was a tiny, sharp jab against the dull roar of the staging area. Further away, a collection of horses stood patiently, their coats gleaming in the sun. Their rhythmic breathing, a series of slow, deep inhalations, provided a counterpoint to the nervous energy of the smaller animals. The scent of their sweat, rich and musky, was a powerful presence, a testament to their strength and vitality. Yet, even their calm was tinged with a subtle tension, a low hum of anticipation vibrating beneath the surface of their placid demeanor. Beyond the horses, a flock of sheep milled about restlessly, their wool a cloudy mass of white against the dusty ground. The incessant bleating of the sheep was a constant reminder of the animals' anxiety, their presence a tangible manifestation of the unrest that hung in the air. The sight of so many animals crammed together, their anxiety palpable, instilled in Henrietta a feeling she couldn't quite name, a mixture of apprehension and a strange sense of camaraderie. The sun beat down relentlessly, baking the earth to a hard, dry crust. The heat shimmered off the canvas tents, distorting their shapes and blurring the edges of the world beyond. The sounds of the staging area intensified as the day progressed, the rhythmic thump of boots and the rumble of trucks becoming a relentless, almost hypnotic drumbeat. The air grew hotter, thicker, laced with the smells of sweat, dust, and the ever-present scent of animal dung. Henrietta noticed a small brown dog, its fur matted and dirty, wandering near the perimeter of the staging area. It whimpered occasionally, a lonely sound lost in the general din. Its eyes, though, held a surprising intelligence, a glimmer of understanding that transcended its obvious fear. The dog's nervous pacing was a silent reflection of the overall anxiety that permeated the staging area. Each hesitant step, each anxious whimper, seemed to echo the feelings that were stirring deep within Henrietta. As the afternoon wore on, the sounds gradually shifted. The sharp, insistent bleating of the goats became less frequent, replaced by a more subdued lowing, punctuated by the occasional snort. The restless pacing of the horses slowed, their movements less frantic, their breathing deeper and more regular. Even the anxious whimpering of the rabbits seemed to quiet, replaced by a sleepy rustling within their crate. A sense of weary resignation seemed to settle over the entire area, a collective acceptance of the reality of their shared circumstances. The air, though still heavy with dust and the scent of animals, took on a slightly different quality. The overwhelming cacophony of the day began to soften, the sharpness of the sounds dulled by the approaching evening. The sun began its descent, casting long, dramatic shadows that stretched and twisted across the staging area. The light grew softer, the colors muted, and a sense of quiet settled over the animals. A lull before the unknown. The overall hum of the staging area remained, yet it now held a different tone, a quiet resignation that foreshadowed the night to come. The distant sounds of distant bugle calls carried on the wind, a mournful melody weaving itself through the other sounds, adding a layer of melancholic anticipation to the scene. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and distant cooking fires, a reminder of the human presence that surrounded and enveloped this temporary animal city, a presence that held both comfort and a certain degree of impending uncertainty. Henrietta, nestled in her basket, felt a shiver run down her spine, not from cold, but from a deep, instinctive awareness of the events to come. The stillness within the basket contrasted sharply with the low, insistent hum of the staging area, a persistent backdrop to the quiet anticipation that now filled the air. The stillness within the basket was broken only by the faintest of rustlings, the tiny movements of Henrietta's feathers as she shifted her weight. The scent of wood smoke, stronger now, mingled with the lingering smells of the animals, creating a complex olfactory tapestry that hung heavy in the air. The approaching night brought with it a chill, a subtle drop in temperature that tightened the air and made the dust settle more heavily on everything. Aziz had walked into town with the dust settling, so there was more heavy on everything. The sounds too changed. The rhythmic thump of boots faded, replaced by the softer sounds of men talking in low voices, the clinking of metal, the occasional cough. The mournful melody of the distant bugle calls ceased, leaving a quietude that felt both expectant and strangely peaceful. Then a new sound emerged, a soft, almost imperceptible cooing. It came from the shadows cast by a large canvas tent, a sound that was both gentle and insistent, a whisper against the backdrop of the night. Henrietta, her senses heightened by the quiet, turned her head slowly, her keen eyes searching the darkness. The cooing grew louder, more insistent, drawing Henrietta's attention to a small, gray form emerging from the shadows. It was a pigeon, larger than the common city pigeon, its feathers the color of weathered slate. Its movements were deliberate, measured, each step precise and unhurried. It hopped closer, its head cocked to one side, its bright, intelligent eyes fixed on Henrietta. The pigeon's feathers were slightly ruffled, the plumage betraying a hint of age and possibly a recent journey. The scent of the pigeon was faint, a musky scent subtly overlaid by the clean scent of damp earth and something else, something akin to wood smoke and old leather, a scent that spoke of long travels and weathered experiences. Its gait was steady, yet there was a certain dignity in its posture, a quiet confidence that belied its relatively small size. As it drew closer, Henrietta could hear the soft click of its beak, the rhythmic sound adding to the quiet symphony of the night. The pigeon stopped a few inches from Henrietta's basket, its gaze steady and unwavering. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, it tilted its head further, its bright eyes scrutinizing Henrietta with an almost unnerving intensity. There was something in its gaze that resonated deeply with Henrietta, something that transcended the usual fear-based interactions she had encountered with other humans and animals. It was a look of understanding, of shared experience. It wasn't pity, not exactly, it was more like recognition. A low cooing emanated from the pigeon's throat, a sound that felt more like a greeting than a mere vocalization. The sound possessed a depth and resonance unexpected from such a small creature. It vibrated in the quiet night air, a gentle tremor that resonated in Henrietta's chest. The pigeon held Henrietta's gaze for a long moment, a moment that felt both timeless and fleeting before it spoke. The words were not audible, at least not in the way Henrietta understood words. It was more of a feeling, a telepathic message that settled directly into her consciousness. A strange warmth spread through her, a feeling of comfort and understanding, dispelling some of the lingering apprehension that had clung to her since her arrival at the staging area. The message was simple, yet profound. It conveyed a sense of empathy, a quiet acknowledgement of her unique and unlikely circumstance. The pigeon, in this silent conversation, offered a silent promise of guidance, of companionship in the strange and uncertain world that awaited them both. The pigeon, it slowly became clear, was no ordinary bird. Its age was evident not just in its weathered feathers, but in the wisdom radiating from its intelligent eyes. Its gaze was calm, steady, filled with the quiet confidence of one who had seen much, endured much, and understood much. It moved with an air of authority, its small body exuding a sense of power that belied its size. This was no mere messenger. This was Sergeant Pigeon, a veteran of countless missions, a creature of immense experience and surprising insight. Sergeant Pigeon settled onto a nearby crate, his body radiating a sense of calm. The scent of old leather and wood smoke intensified, mingling with the earthy scent of the night. The gentle cooing continued, a steady rhythm that punctuated the silence, a calming counterpoint to the low hum of the staging area. The air was thick with unspoken understanding, with a shared awareness of the uncertainties that lay ahead. The sergeant shifted slightly, his bright eyes still fixed on Henrietta. He tilted his head once more, a subtle movement that conveyed a patient understanding of Henrietta's apprehension. He didn't rush her, didn't press for answers or immediate action. He simply sat there, a small, unassuming figure against the backdrop of the vast staging area, a silent beacon of hope and resilience in the heart of the looming chaos. The night deepened, the stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky. The air grew colder, but a sense of quiet warmth settled over Henrietta, emanating not from the physical surroundings, but from the unspoken connection she felt with the old pigeon. A sense of comfort born not of familiarity, but of a deep-seated understanding of shared fate and impending adventure. The faint scent of wood smoke lingered in the air, a gentle reminder of the human world that existed beyond the staging area, a world that awaited both Henrietta and her unlikely mentor, the wise old Sergeant Pigeon. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in soft pastels, barely disturbing the quietude of the staging area. Sergeant Pigeon ruffled his feathers, a soft rustling sound that broke the stillness. He emitted a low, comforting coo, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very fabric of the morning. The scent of wood smoke had faded, replaced by the crisp, clean scent of dew-kissed grass and the faint, earthy aroma of the nearby fields. Henrietta, feeling a strange sense of calm despite the unusual circumstances, pecked tentatively at the bottom of her basket. The rough texture of the woven wicker felt familiar, grounding her in the present moment. The day began slowly, much like the dawning light. A young soldier, barely more than a boy, approached, his movements hesitant and unsure. He carried a small wooden crate, filled with what appeared to be a variety of grains and seeds, meticulously separated into small compartments. The scent of the grains was sharp and inviting, a mixture of familiar oats and barley, alongside something more exotic, perhaps millet or canary seed, a hint of unfamiliar sweetness permeating the air. He spoke to Sergeant Pigeon in hushed tones, their exchange a low murmur of unintelligible sounds punctuated by the pigeon's soft coos. Henrietta watched, fascinated, as the boy carefully placed the crate near her basket. He then produced a small, polished wooden whistle, the smooth surface gleaming in the morning light. The whistle itself smelled faintly of beeswax and linseed oil, a testament to its careful craftsmanship. He blew a short, high-pitched note, clear, piercing sound that cut through the quiet morning air. Henrietta flinched slightly, but the sound wasn't unpleasant, more a signal than an alarm. The training began subtly. The boy, following Sergeant Pigeon's apparent instructions, scattered a few grains of barley near the edge of Henrietta's basket. Henrietta, naturally curious, pecked at the offered food, her movements tentative at first, then gradually more confident. This was repeated several times, each repetition slightly farther from the basket. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Henrietta was being trained to move away from her comfort zone, responding to visual cues and the reward of food. The process was slow, methodical, and devoid of any harshness. It was a gentle introduction to the concept of obedience, a process of building trust and understanding. The next exercise involved a simple wooden ramp. The scent of fresh-cut wood was strong, mingling with the earthiness of the surrounding soil. It was a gradual incline, barely steeper than a gentle slope in the nearby fields. Sergeant Pigeon, perched atop a nearby crate, observed Henrietta with his unwavering gaze. The boy whistled once, a soft, encouraging note. Henrietta, having mastered the first exercise, approached the ramp cautiously, pecking at it tentatively before stepping onto the smooth, polished surface. The feel of the wood under her claws was new, slightly different from the rough earth, and she paused briefly before continuing her ascent. She reached the top, rewarded with a small handful of the sweet, exotic seed. Throughout the morning, Henrietta participated in a series of seemingly absurd drills. Each exercise, though outwardly simple, demanded focus and patience. She navigated a series of miniature obstacles, each designed to test her agility and coordination. Her progress rewarded with different types of grain and seeds, the diverse aromas, the earthy scent of oats, the slightly sweet smell of millet, the nutty fragrance of sunflower seeds, kept Henrietta engaged and alert. One exercise involved carrying small weights, tiny clay balls barely larger than pebbles, each weighted to exactly 1 gram. The smooth, cool texture of the clay was a stark contrast to the rough wood and the coarse grains. The weight, almost negligible, still required effort, her tiny legs working tirelessly to maintain balance. Another drill involved what seemed like a game of hide-and-seek, with the boy scattering a trail of grains through low-lying vegetation. This exercise trained her to navigate complex environments. The scent of different grasses and wildflowers filled the air as Henrietta followed the trail, her keen senses guiding her steps. The scent of damp soil, rich with the essence of decaying leaves, was a powerful sensory cue. The afternoon brought a new challenge. A series of low tunnels constructed from woven reeds appeared. The earthy smell of the reeds was strong, a musky scent tinged with the faint sweetness of sap. Henrietta, guided by the soft whistles and the occasional encouraging coo from Sergeant Pigeon, navigated the tunnels with remarkable dexterity, squeezing through tight spaces and emerging on the other side, triumphant. The reward this time was a small piece of boiled potato, the earthy fragrance of the potato mingling with the other scents of the training ground. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the training area, the intensity of the training lessened. Henrietta was exhausted, but a strange sense of satisfaction filled her. The day had been long and challenging, yet the tasks were never overly demanding, and she had been constantly rewarded for her efforts. The exhaustion was physical, but it was not unpleasant. It was the exhaustion of a productive day, the weariness of a job well done. Sergeant Pigeon landed softly on Henrietta's basket, his coo a gentle lullaby. The scent of wood smoke returned faintly, a subtle reminder of the outside world, the world beyond the staging area, the world Henrietta was now slowly preparing to enter. The night settled in, the stars appearing one by one, and the gentle rhythm of Sergeant Pigeon's cooing lulled Henrietta into a deep, restful sleep. The scent of the day's training, the grains, the wood, the clay, the reeds, mingled with the night air, a subtle, olfactory tapestry weaving a calming dream. The following morning dawned crisp and cool, the air carrying the scent of dew-kissed grass and the faint, earthy aroma of freshly turned soil. Henrietta awoke to the familiar gentle cooing of Sergeant Pigeon, the sound a comforting presence in the pre-dawn stillness. The sun, a pale disk on the horizon, cast long shadows across the training area, painting the landscape in muted hues of gray and gold. The boy, his face still pale with the youthful flush of sleep, was already awake, his movements slow and deliberate as he prepared the day's training exercises. Today, however, there was a difference. A new presence occupied the far corner of the training area, a low, muffled sound emanating from a large woven basket. Curiosity piqued, Henrietta craned her neck, her keen eyes discerning movement within the shadows. As the light grew stronger, she saw it, a small, dark shape nestled amongst the straw. The boy, sensing her interest, approached the basket, his hand gently lifting a corner of the woven cover. Within, nestled amongst the straw, was a small lamb, its fleece the color of dark chocolate, its eyes still heavy with sleep. The lamb bleated softly, a tentative, almost hesitant sound, its breath a small, misty cloud in the cool morning air. The scent of wool, fresh and clean, mingled with the earthy smells of the training ground, creating a unique and calming fragrance. Henrietta watched, her movements cautious, as the boy carefully lifted the lamb from its basket. The lamb was surprisingly small, its legs still unsteady, its gait wobbly. It seemed to be no older than a few weeks old. The boy, his movements remarkably tender, placed the lamb gently on the soft earth. The lamb, still somewhat dazed, took a tentative step, its small hoofs sinking slightly into the damp soil. The scent of the lamb's fleece, mingled with the earthy scent of the soil, created a strangely comforting aroma, a feeling of unexpected gentleness in the harsh environment of the training area. The boy then turned his attention back to Henrietta, his eyes softening as he spoke to her in a low, soothing tone, a gentle murmur of words that Henrietta didn't understand but instinctively sensed were reassuring. He scattered a handful of barley near the lamb, its small head dipping immediately to nibble at the offered food. Henrietta, after a moment's hesitation, took a step closer, her own movements tentative, filled with a newfound curiosity. The lamb looked up, its eyes large and dark, its gaze meeting Henrietta's. There was no fear, only a quiet inquisitiveness in those gentle eyes. The training exercises continued, but now with the lamb as a silent observer. The lamb, named Pip by the boy, seemed content to simply watch Henrietta navigate the obstacle course, its small head tilted in quiet fascination. The smells of the day, the wood, the clay, the grains, the reeds, and now the wool of Pip's fleece, all blended together in a strangely harmonious fragrance. As Henrietta completed each exercise, Pip would bleat softly, a tiny sound of encouragement, and the boy would reward both of them with small handfuls of grain and seeds, creating a sense of shared accomplishment. The shared meals became a ritual. The boy would place small piles of food close enough for both Henrietta and Pip to eat comfortably. The sight of them feeding side by side was a study in contrasts. Henrietta's quick, efficient pecking movements contrasted sharply with Pip's gentler, more hesitant nibbling. Yet there was a shared rhythm to their mealtimes, a shared sense of purpose in their quiet consumption. The sounds were a symphony of small movements. The quiet scratching of Henrietta's claws on the earth, the soft munching of Pip's jaw, and the gentle rustle of the boy's movements as he replenished their bowls. Throughout the day, a bond began to form between Henrietta and Pip. It wasn't a sudden rush of affection, but a slow, steady growth, nurtured by shared experiences and the gentle care of the boy. They would often rest close to each other, the warmth of Pip's small body radiating against the cool earth, a comforting presence for Henrietta. The smells intermingled, the earthy scent of Pip's fleece against Henrietta's feathers, creating a unique and strangely peaceful olfactory experience. Henrietta would occasionally peck gently at Pip's fleece, a small gesture of affection that Pip would respond to with a soft bleat, a sound that had lost its hesitancy, replaced by a quiet confidence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the training concluded. Henrietta and Pip huddled together close to their baskets, their shared exhaustion a testament to the day's shared experiences. The combined smells of the day were potent, the earth, the grain, the wood, the reeds, the wool, all settling into a soft, calming aroma that permeated the air. The gentle cooing of Sergeant Pigeon, the soft bleaking of Pip, and the rhythmic sounds of the boy quietly cleaning their feeding bowls created a comforting lullaby. The stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, their light soft and gentle, creating a sense of peace and quietude. Under the watchful gaze of Sergeant Pigeon and the gentle care of the boy, Henrietta and Pip drifted off to sleep, their new friendship a silent testament to the unexpected bonds forged in the midst of war. The night air held the scent of their shared day, a comforting perfume of trust and companionship, a promise of the quiet strength that friendship could bring, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. The next morning dawned with a pale, watery sun, its light filtering weakly through the early mist that clung to the low-lying ground. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and the lingering sweetness of the previous day's barley. Henrietta awoke to the soft bleating of Pip, the small lamb nestled close to her side. The warmth of his fleece against her feathers was a comforting presence, a tangible reminder of the unexpected friendship that had blossomed amidst the rigorous training. The boy, his face etched with a quiet weariness, was already stirring, the gentle clinking of metal against metal emanating from the nearby supply wagon, a barely audible counterpoint to the sounds of nature. The journey began slowly. The carts laden with supplies and animals creaked and groaned their way along a rutted track, each bump and jolt sending a tremor through Henrietta's perch within her crate. The movement was steady, almost hypnotic. The rhythmic creaking of the wheels, the occasional snorting of the horses, the low murmuring of the soldiers, all blended into a constant low hum, a lullaby of sorts. Pip, now securely nestled in a basket next to Henrietta, bleated occasionally, his soft cries swallowed by the larger sounds of the journey. The landscape changed gradually. The familiar training grounds, with their carefully cultivated fields and meticulously arranged obstacles, gave way to a landscape that was increasingly wild. The neatly ordered rows of grain were replaced by rough, untamed patches of vegetation. Interspersed with scrub and stunted trees, the scent of cultivated earth yielded to a stronger, more earthy fragrance. The aroma of wild herbs and damp soil, mingling with the pungent smell of wood smoke, carried on the breeze from distant villages. The air grew cooler, the warmth of the sun gradually becoming less intense as they moved further from the familiar comfort of the training area. As they traveled, the sounds of nature grew louder, increasingly dominating the man-made noises of their journey. Birds sang their morning songs, their melodies weaving in and out of the steady rhythm of the carts. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, its soft sighs a counterpoint to the more constant sounds of travel. Occasionally a distant crow would call, its call stark and lonely against the gentler sounds of the countryside. The changing sounds created a shifting sensory landscape. Henrietta felt the changing rhythms of nature, the subtle shifts in the smells carried on the breeze, the way the light altered throughout the day. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the earth and drying the morning mist. The air became noticeably drier and warmer, hinting at the proximity of a change in the environment. The landscape, too, reflected this change. The rolling hills, once verdant and green, now began to show signs of wear, the green slowly transforming into shades of brown and gray. The scent of earth gave way to the drier smell of dust and parched grass. The further they traveled, the more desolate and barren the landscape became. The rhythm of the journey continued, unrelenting and unwavering. Day gave way to night, the stars emerging as the sun dipped below the horizon, their light a distant echo in the ever-changing sky. The sounds of the day shifted into the quieter sounds of night. The steady creak of the carts softened, the chirping of insects increased. Under the soft cover of the night sky, the journey held a different character, a silent, solemn process. Henrietta often found herself dreaming within the confines of her crate, her sleep a refuge from the increasing uncertainty and change. Pip would occasionally bleat softly in his basket, his voice a comforting presence in the deepening twilight. As they continued, signs of human habitation became increasingly infrequent. The occasional village, once a welcome sight, grew sparse, and their homes were smaller, more weather-beaten. The cheerful sounds of daily life, the laughter of children, the rhythmic sounds of work gradually faded into silence, replaced by the pervasive quiet of the approaching war zone. The air itself grew heavy, carrying a new odor, one that Henrietta found difficult to define, but that nonetheless hung in the air, a subtle but undeniable presence. It was a mixture of smoke, dust, and something else, something metallic, almost acrid, a strange and unsettling scent that seemed to permeate everything. This was a new, ominous note within the symphony of the journey, a counterpoint to the gentler sounds of nature, a hint of the harsh reality that lay ahead. It was in this moment of mounting tension that Henrietta fully understood what lay in store: the front lines, the war. And she, a Rhode Island red hen, was going to be a part of it all. The journey's end was approaching. The rhythmic creaking of the cartwheels ceased. A jarring silence descended, broken only by the nervous clucking of Henrietta and the soft bleating of Pip. The acrid smell, that metallic tang in the air, intensified, mixing with the dampness of the earth, creating a strange, almost suffocating perfume. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faintest glimmer of starlight that barely pierced the oppressive gloom. Then the sounds began, not the gradual crescendo of a symphony, but a cacophony, a brutal, discordant onslaught on the senses. A low, guttural rumble vibrated through the ground, a tremor that ran through Henrietta's very bones. It was the sound of distant artillery, a deep, resonating boom that echoed through the night, swallowed and then regurgitated by the oppressive silence that followed. It was a sound both immense and terrifying, a sound that spoke of power and destruction beyond anything Henrietta had ever known. The rumble was punctuated by sharper, closer sounds, the staccato bursts of gunfire, the sharp crack of rifles, the metallic shriek of metal on metal, a sound both horrifying and strangely hypnotic in its unrelenting repetition. The ground beneath the cart vibrated continuously, a constant, unsettling reminder of the unseen violence that surrounded them. The air grew thick with the smell of cordite, a sharp, acrid scent that burned in Henrietta's nostrils, a stark contrast to the earthy fragrances of her familiar Rhode Island farm. This new scent mingled with the metallic tang, the smell of blood, faint but unmistakable, a grim olfactory signature of the battle that raged nearby. Henrietta, still within her crate, felt the tremors in the ground intensify. Dust, disturbed by the constant shelling, sifted through the cracks in the wooden slats, coating her feathers in a fine, gritty film. The darkness was almost palpable, a heavy blanket smothering the faint light of the stars. Occasionally, a fleeting glimpse of flame would illuminate the immediate surroundings, casting long, flickering shadows that danced and writhed in the gloom. These fleeting illuminations revealed glimpses of the landscape, a scene of devastation, of mud and craters, of broken earth and twisted metal. The sounds increased in intensity. The constant barrage of artillery became a deafening roar, punctuated by the sharper, closer sounds of smaller arms fire. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the violence, the continuous barrage of noise assaulting Henrietta's senses. The cries of men, muffled and distant, were interspersed with the moans of the wounded, a chilling counterpoint to the mechanical symphony of war. The screams were punctuated by shouts and commands, a desperate attempt to maintain order amidst the chaos. Pip in his basket beside her bleated anxiously, his small body trembling. Henrietta could feel his fear, a palpable presence in the cramped confines of the cart. She huddled closer, her own fear mixing with the overwhelming sensory assault. The smells were unbearable. The acrid smell of cordite, the metallic tang of blood, the stench of decay and death, all mingled in a sickening cocktail that filled the air. The relentless shelling seemed to never end, each blast sending a new tremor through the ground, a new wave of fear through Henrietta. Even the brief moments of silence were filled with tension, an expectant hush before the next explosion, the next volley of gunfire. It was a waiting game, a silent, agonizing anticipation of the inevitable. Henrietta could feel the vibration of the earth as the shells landed, the ground trembling under the constant assault. Each explosion sent a wave of dust and debris cascading down on her crate, a constant reminder of her precarious position. Then, as suddenly as it began, the bombardment eased, the intensity of the artillery fire lessened, the rhythmic booms fading into a distant rumble. The sharp cracks of rifle fire decreased, and the cries of men lessened, though the moans of the wounded remained, a constant low thrum in the background. The silence that followed was not a peaceful silence, but a tense, expectant quiet, the lull before the storm. The smell of cordite still hung heavy in the air, a lingering reminder of the recent violence. The metallic tang remained, a persistent undercurrent to the other scents. The cart lurched forward, the wheels crunching on the uneven ground. They were moving again, deeper into the heart of the battlefield. The sounds of the war were closer now, more distinct, the details of the violence more sharply defined. The earth was churned, scarred with craters and trenches. The darkness was broken by flickering light, lamps and flares, casting an eerie glow on the scene. The air remained thick with the smell of cordite, of blood, of death. Henrietta closed her eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming sensory assault, seeking refuge in the quiet darkness of her crate. But even in the darkness, the sounds and smells of the trench, of the war, remained, a grim reminder of her unexpected and terrifying new reality. The war was not just a distant rumble. It was a visceral sensory experience, one that threatened to overwhelm her completely. The journey was far from over. The cart lurched again, the wooden slats groaning under the strain. The jarring movement stirred Pip, who let out a soft, whimpering bleat. Henrietta felt the familiar warmth of his small body pressed against hers, a comforting weight in the chaos. The sounds of the war were now a constant, close presence. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of approaching boots on the muddy ground vibrated through the cart's floor, each step a percussive beat in the symphony of destruction. A low guttural groan emanated from somewhere nearby, the sound of a man in pain, his suffering a stark counterpoint to the mechanical rhythm of marching feet. The cart slowed, its progress impeded by the uneven terrain. Henrietta felt a shift in the angle of the cart, a slight tilt as it negotiated a rut in the earth. The smell of damp earth, rich and heavy, mixed with a lingering stench of cordite, creating a nauseating combination. A new scent emerged, a sharp, metallic tang, stronger now, closer. The scent of blood, no longer faint and distant, filled the air, a pervasive, almost suffocating presence. Clung to the back of Henrietta's throat, a bitter, metallic taste that coated her tongue. A fleeting illumination, the brief flare of a distant lamp, revealed a scene of utter devastation. Broken carts, overturned and scattered, littered the landscape. Pieces of shattered wood and twisted metal, grim remnants of destruction, were strewn amidst the mud. The ground itself seemed to be wounded, torn, and scarred by explosions, a landscape pitted with craters like a diseased hide. In the brief flash of light, Henrietta saw the men. They were everywhere, moving like shadows in the gloom, their figures indistinct yet somehow deeply disturbing. Some moved with a purposeful stride, others stumbled, their movements slow and labored. The light revealed the extent of the destruction, the scale of the carnage. The darkness returned, plunging them back into a heavy blanket of night. The sounds intensified. The distant rumble of artillery grew into a closer, more menacing roar. The sharp crack of gunfire was now a continuous volley, an incessant, terrifying rhythm. The cries of the men became clearer, more desperate, more agonizing. One cry in particular stood out, a long, drawn-out scream that echoed through the night, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Henrietta closed her eyes, trying to shut out the visual horrors, but the sounds, the smells, the very vibrations of the ground penetrated every part of her being. Pip bleated again, a small, frightened sound lost in the cacophony of war. Henrietta felt his trembling against her. She reached out, her beak brushing against his soft fur, a small gesture of comfort in the face of overwhelming fear. The tremors in the ground intensified, each jolt a physical manifestation of the nearby explosions. Dust, fine and gritty, sifted down through the cracks in the wood, coating her feathers in a fine layer of grime. The air grew thick and heavy, suffocating, a miasma of blood, cordite, and decay. The cart shuddered, then stopped. A moment of agonizing silence hung in the air, punctuated only by the moans of the wounded. The silence was filled with a palpable tension, an expectant hush that was far more terrifying than the previous onslaught. Then a new sound emerged, a low, rhythmic, scratching sound, close by, as if something was digging through the earth. It was a repetitive sound, scratching, 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 each scratch sending a fresh wave of dread through Henrietta. The darkness was complete, broken only by the occasional flash of distant gunfire. The smell of blood intensified, thick and cloying, almost sweet, an unnatural perfume of death. Henrietta felt a tremor run through her entire body, a primal fear that transcended her understanding. It was a feeling of impending doom, a premonition of something terrible about to happen, something she couldn't comprehend but instinctively felt in her very bone. The scratching sound continued, closer now, accompanied by the soft thud of earth falling back into place. A new sound then, a low growl, something close to a whimper but deeper, emanating from the darkness. A sense of palpable dread washed over Henrietta. It was a fear so intense, so primal, so deeply unsettling it stole her breath. The sounds of the war faded into the background, rendered secondary to this newer, more intimate terror. The cart remained still, silent, the only sound the rhythmic scratching and the low growl from the darkness, a chilling prelude to what was to come. The night pressed in, heavy and suffocating, the weight of the unknown pressing down on Henrietta, threatening to crush her small frame in its relentless grip. The darkness held its breath, waiting, and Henrietta, along with Pip, waited with it. The waiting in itself felt like a punishment, a slow, agonizing torture. Each passing moment stretched into an eternity. The scratching stopped. The growl subsided, replaced by a soft, almost imperceptible snuffling. Henrietta felt a tremor, not of fear this time, but of something else, a strange, unsettling curiosity. The darkness, thick and absolute, seemed to press in even more heavily, as if holding its breath, anticipating something. Then, a small, earthy sound, like the gentle shifting of soil. A faint, musty smell, different from the blood and cordite, rose from the ground, the scent of damp earth and something else, something organic, decaying, yet faintly sweet. Slowly, cautiously, Henrietta cocked her head, her keen eyes straining in the darkness. The faintest glimmer, a reflection perhaps, caught her attention. It was a tiny spark, barely visible, emanating from a small crevice in the earth, close to the cartwheel. The spark grew, becoming a tiny, flickering flame. It cast a weak, dancing light, just enough to illuminate a small area around the crevice. There, nestled in the earth, was a small, injured soldier. He was young, barely a man, his uniform torn and stained, mud caking his face and hair. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and ragged. A deep gash on his leg, bleeding slowly, was visible in the dim light. Near him, buried partially in the earth, was a small metal box. The flickering light revealed its intricate carvings, a delicate design of interwoven leaves and flowers, a stark contrast to the brutal landscape surrounding it. Henrietta watched, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against her ribs. The soldier groaned softly, a pained whimper escaping his lips. The flickering light revealed the extent of his wounds, more than just a leg wound. His arm was also injured, his shirt soaked crimson. A small, almost imperceptible tremor ran through his body. Pip, sensing the change in Henrietta's posture, nudged her gently. His soft bleating sounded unusually quiet, a mere whisper in the heavy silence. Henrietta felt a surge of protectiveness towards both the soldier and Pip, an unfamiliar feeling of empathy, a longing to alleviate the suffering she witnessed. The soldier stirred again, his eyes fluttering open. They met Henrietta's gaze for a brief moment, a fleeting connection in the darkness. His eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and confusion clouding their depths. He tried to speak, but only a faint, raspy sound escaped his lips. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing against the wooden side of the cart. Henrietta, in a moment of unexpected clarity, understood. The soldier was not just injured, he was disoriented, lost, and alone. The small metal box, the intricate carvings, hinted at something precious. He was protecting something, hiding something of importance, burying it to safeguard it from the chaos around him. The flickering light from the crevice cast long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed like phantoms. The scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation intensified, mingled with the faint, sweet metallic tang of blood. A low rumble shook the ground, the distant echoes of the ongoing battle. But here, in this small, illuminated space, the violence felt distant, muted, almost surreal. Henrietta, usually focused on her own well-being and the pecking order of the coop, felt a strange compulsion. It wasn't instinct, not exactly. It was a sense of duty, a quiet understanding. This young man, wounded and alone, needed help. She nudged Pip gently, urging him to stay quiet and still. Then, with a soft clucking sound, she moved closer to the soldier. She pecked gently at the earth around the metal box, clearing away the mud and debris, revealing more of the intricate carvings in the dim light. The soldier watched her, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and gratitude. He made another attempt to speak, his voice a mere whisper now, lost in the night, a sound barely audible even to Henrietta's keen hearing. She continued her work, carefully dislodging the soil, creating a small space around the box. Her actions, small and deliberate, were a silent promise, a gesture of unexpected aid in the midst of the devastating conflict. The box, now partially uncovered, seemed to gleam faintly in the dim light, a treasure in a wasteland. The rhythmic thumping of Henrietta's heart resonated with the steady, low rumble of distant artillery. The smells, blood, earth, cordite, decay, all blended together, a strange olfactory tapestry against the backdrop of the flickering candlelight. The soldier's ragged breathing was the only sound that really penetrated the stillness. Henrietta felt an odd sense of calm, a strange peace settling over her as she continued her quiet work, her small actions in stark contrast to the brutal reality of the war raging around them. The work was slow, methodical, each peck of her beak a silent act of defiance against the chaos. The darkness held its breath, waiting. And Henrietta, along with Pip, worked, waiting, in the heart of the storm. The weight of the unknown lifted slightly, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. The scratching sound, earlier so frightening, now seemed almost comforting, a counterpoint to the rumble of war. The soft earth a friendly presence in a shattered world. The small metal box, freed from the clinging earth, felt cool and smooth beneath Henrietta's beak. The intricate carvings, now fully visible, depicted a scene of idyllic peace, a winding river, lush trees, and a cottage nestled amongst wildflowers, a stark contrast to the ravaged landscape surrounding them. The soldier's breathing, though still shallow, seemed a little less ragged. His hand, pale and trembling, rested lightly on the box. The faint, sweet scent of blood mingled with the earthy aroma of the freshly turned soil, a peculiar perfume in the darkness. Henrietta felt a faint tremor in the ground, a low vibration that spoke of distant explosions. Yet here, in their small, illuminated haven, the violence felt distant, muffled, as if viewed through a thick, sound-dampening curtain. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows, their movements slow and deliberate, like the slow, methodical work of Henrietta's beak. Pip remained motionless, his soft breathing a counterpoint to the soldier's labored gasps. The soldier's eyes, though still clouded with pain and confusion, held a glimmer of something else. Relief, perhaps? Or gratitude? It was difficult to say. His gaze lingered on Henrietta, on her focused work, a small, persistent act of kindness in the face of overwhelming destruction. The texture of the soil beneath her claws, damp and yielding, offered a strange sense of comfort. It was a grounding sensation, a connection to something solid and enduring in this chaotic world. The metallic tang of blood, once sharp and intense, gradually faded, replaced by the subtler scent of wood smoke carried on the night air. The smoke, a distant reminder of warmth and life, offered a small measure of solace in the chilling darkness. The rhythmic tapping of Henrietta's beak provided a steady, almost hypnotic beat, a gentle counterpoint to the distant, rumbling thunder of artillery. The sounds, the soldier's breathing, the distant explosions, the gentle scratching of Henrietta's beak, wove themselves into a strange, yet strangely calming tapestry. As the last of the earth was removed, the metal box lay fully revealed. It was small, no larger than Henrietta's head, its surface cool and smooth to the touch. The intricate carvings, now bathed in the flickering candlelight, shimmered faintly. They were remarkably preserved, a testament to their creator's meticulous craftsmanship. The soldier's hands, still trembling, reached out to touch the box, his fingers tracing the delicate lines of the carvings with a slow, reverent touch. Henrietta felt a sense of completion, a quiet satisfaction in her unexpected task. She had done what she could, offered a small measure of help in a world consumed by violence. The feeling was unfamiliar, foreign even, yet strangely comforting. It was a departure from the instinctive pecking order, the everyday struggles for dominance and survival. This was something different, something larger. The soldier, with a visible effort, sat up slightly, leaning against the wooden side of the cart. His movements were slow and painful, each one a testament to his injuries. He looked at Henrietta, his gaze intense, full of a gratitude that transcended words. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing against her feathers, a light touch that felt surprisingly gentle. The candlelight flickered again, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed across the ground. The scent of wood smoke intensified, mingling with the faint aroma of herbs and something else, something sweet, like dried flowers. Henrietta, accustomed to the simpler smells of her coop, hay, grain, earth, found this unfamiliar mixture surprisingly soothing. It was a scent that hinted at a life far removed from the horrors of war, a life of peace and tranquility. A low sigh escaped the soldier's lips, a sound of exhaustion, of relief. He closed his eyes, his breathing slowing, becoming more even. The rhythmic thumping of Henrietta's heart, once a source of anxiety, now felt comforting, a steady beat in the midst of the chaos. The distant rumbling of artillery continued, a constant reminder of the war raging beyond their small, illuminated space. Yet, here, in this quiet haven, a sense of peace had settled. Henrietta, nestled beside Pip, felt a warmth spread through her, a feeling of unexpected accomplishment. She had helped. She had made a difference. And in the quiet of the night, under the flickering candlelight, she felt a sense of calm she had never known before. The weight of the world, of the war, of the unknown, seemed to lift slightly. The soft earth, the gentle scratching of her beak, the soldier's quiet breathing, all contributed to a growing sense of tranquility. The battle raged on, but here, in their tiny sanctuary, there was a moment of peace. A moment of unexpected, fragile hope. The scent of dried flowers, faint yet persistent, lingered in the air. Henrietta, nestled close to Pip, felt the warmth of his feathers against her own. Pip, usually so restless, slept soundly, his small body a gentle weight against her side. The soldier's breathing, slow and even, was a comforting rhythm in the stillness of the night. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows, dancing across the canvas of the cart's interior, creating a mesmerizing, hypnotic effect. The shadows seemed to breathe, to pulse with a slow, almost imperceptible rhythm, mirroring the slow, steady beat of Henrietta's own heart. A subtle shift in the air, a change almost imperceptible to human senses, alerted Henrietta. It wasn't a sound, not exactly, but a shift in the stillness, a subtle change in the delicate balance of scents. The sweet aroma of dried flowers had lessened, replaced by something else, something colder, sharper. The metallic tang, though faint, was unmistakable. It was the smell of blood. Again, but different this time. It held a stillness, a finality that the previous night's scent had lacked. Henrietta felt a tremor, not in the earth this time, but in Pip. A slight shiver ran through his small body. He stirred, let out a soft chirp, a tiny, questioning sound that was quickly silenced. His head, usually so alert, rested heavily against Henrietta's side. He did not move again. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with an unspoken loss. The distant rumble of artillery faded into the background, the sounds of war muted by the sudden, overwhelming weight of grief. Henrietta felt a strange stillness within herself, a profound emptiness that echoed the silence surrounding them. The rhythmic tapping of her beak, usually a source of comfort, ceased. Her movements, usually so precise, were now hesitant, uncertain. The world, once a collection of familiar textures, the rough wood of the cart, the damp earth, the smooth surface of the metal box, now felt foreign, alien. The candlelight flickered, casting a momentary darkness that amplified the silence. Henrietta felt a strange coldness creep into her feathers, a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. She reached out with her beak, touching Pip's feathers, a gentle probing gesture of concern. His body was limp, unresponsive. The softness of his feathers, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a cruel reminder of her loss. The soldier stirred, a low groan escaping his lips. His eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on Henrietta, then falling upon Pip's still form. A wave of understanding washed over his face, his eyes welling with unshed tears. The relief he'd shown previously was gone, replaced by a profound sorrow that mirrored Henrietta's own. The gratitude remained, however, a silent acknowledgement of the small, comforting presence Henrietta had been throughout his ordeal. He reached out, gently stroking Pip's lifeless body, a gesture of respect and mourning. His touch was hesitant, full of a sadness that spoke volumes. His fingers moved slowly, tracing the delicate contours of Pip's small form, a silent farewell. The candlelight cast long, mournful shadows, dancing in the stillness, creating a macabre ballet of light and darkness. The smell of dried flowers returned, softer now, mingled with the ever-present scent of wood smoke, creating a poignant blend of life and death. The wood smoke held a warmth that did little to combat the cold that settled deep within Henrietta. She felt the absence of Pip intensely, a gaping hole in the fabric of her world. He had been her companion, her shadow, a source of comfort in the midst of chaos. His absence was a stark physical ache. The soldier, still stroking Pip's body, let out a long, drawn-out sigh. The sound was heavy with grief, echoing the silence within Henrietta's heart. He reached out and gently picked up Pip's body, holding him close, a quiet gesture of affection in the face of loss. His movements were slow, careful, full of a gentle reverence that transcended words. Henrietta watched, her heart heavy, feeling a deep sense of empathy for the soldier's sorrow. His own pain, once so palpable, seemed overshadowed by the shared grief they now experienced. The distant rumble of war continued, an almost indifferent backdrop to the personal tragedy unfolding before her. The sounds of the war faded further into the background, the weight of their shared loss eclipsing all else. The soldier placed Pip gently back on the earth, his movements still slow, deliberate, respectful. He looked at Henrietta again, his gaze conveying a complex mixture of sympathy, understanding, and silent acknowledgement of shared loss. A single tear rolled down his cheek, reflecting the flickering candlelight, a tiny, glistening jewel of sorrow in the face of immeasurable loss. Henrietta remained motionless, her senses overwhelmed by the weight of grief. The textures, the smells, the sounds, all seemed dull, muted, their vibrancy dimmed by the profound sorrow that enveloped her. The world had shifted, irrevocably altered by the loss of her small companion. The quiet scratching of her beak started again, a gentle, repetitive sound, a tiny act of self-soothing in the midst of profound sadness. The rhythmic tapping of her beak against the earth, the slow, gentle movements of her body became a silent lament, a quiet mourning for a friend lost too soon. The night air remained heavy with the combined sense of wood smoke, dried flowers, and the faint lingering scent of blood, a somber reminder of the reality of war, the fragility of life, and the deep abiding bond she shared with her tiny silent companion. The candlelight continued to flicker, casting long somber shadows, a visual representation of the deep and lingering sadness that had settled upon them both. The scratching of Henrietta's beak continued, a slow, rhythmic counterpoint to the soldier's quiet sobs. The candlelight, a fragile island of warmth in the encroaching darkness, cast long shadows that stretched and shifted with the slightest movement of the air. The scent of wood smoke, still pungent, mingled with the delicate fragrance of the dried flowers, a comforting if melancholic blend. The soldier, his face etched with grief, sat motionless for a long time, his hand resting gently on the earth where Pip lay. The weight of his loss seemed to settle upon him, a heavy cloak of sorrow. Henrietta, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, felt a slight stirring within herself. The profound emptiness hadn't vanished, but a small crack of something akin to acceptance began to form. The rhythmic tapping of her beak, once a lament, now held a slightly steadier rhythm, a subtle indication of a gradual return to normalcy. The rough texture of the earth beneath her feet, usually unnoticed, became a source of grounding comfort. The damp coolness against her claws provided a counterpoint to the warmth of her feathers, a grounding sensation amidst the chaos of her emotions. The soldier eventually stood, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were afraid to disturb the fragile peace that had settled around them. He carefully gathered some of the dried flowers, their delicate petals crumbling slightly beneath his touch, and gently placed them over Pip's tiny body, a final act of tender farewell. The scent of the flowers intensified momentarily, a fleeting reminder of Pip's own delicate essence. The soldier's fingers, calloused from years of labor and war, moved with surprising gentleness, a testament to the deep affection he felt for the small creature. He knelt again, his gaze fixed on the spot where Pip rested, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion and grief. The sounds of the war, previously muted by their shared sorrow, returned, but this time they held less power. The distant rumble of artillery, the occasional sharp crack of gunfire, seemed far removed, distant echoes in a world that had shrunk to the small space surrounding the candlelight. The soldier sighed, a long, drawn-out breath that released some of the tension that had gripped him. He rose and looked at Henrietta. His eyes, though still red-rimmed now, held a flicker of something akin to resignation. He reached into his knapsack, the rough canvas a familiar texture against his hand, and pulled out a small tin container. The metallic scent of the tin was sharp, a momentary disruption of the prevailing sense of wood smoke and flowers. He carefully opened the tin, revealing a small pile of grains. The grains, a mixture of wheat and barley, were the soldier's own meager rations, carefully saved and precious. He offered some to Henrietta. Henrietta, hesitant at first, cautiously pecked at the grains. The familiar taste, a small, simple comfort, was a welcome contrast to the bitterness of grief. The action was a small step, a tentative movement toward a return to the routine that had defined her life before the war. The familiar act of eating, the texture of the grains against her beak, brought a fleeting sense of normalcy. It was a small thing, yet it felt profound in the face of the immense sadness they shared. He continued to sit silently beside her, occasionally offering her more grains. The silence was no longer filled with the heavy weight of grief, but with a shared understanding, a quiet companionship born of a shared loss. The rhythmic tapping of her beak became steadier, more assured, a testament to the slow, gradual healing process that had begun. The candlelight continued to flicker, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls of the makeshift shelter, but the shadows seemed less menacing, their darkness softened by the small, shared moment of quiet comfort. The soldier, finally feeling the weariness of his body and mind, leaned back against the rough-hewn wood of the cart. The wood felt cool and comforting against his tired skin, a grounding sensation against the emotional turmoil he had endured. The distant sounds of war continued, a persistent reminder of the broader conflict. Yet, within their small, sheltered space, a semblance of normalcy had begun to emerge. The cold that had settled in Henrietta's feathers seemed to gradually retreat, replaced by the slow warmth of simple routine and shared quiet. Henrietta continued to eat, her movements now precise and deliberate, each peck a small affirmation of her resilience. The grains, simple and familiar, brought with them a sense of grounding, of continuity in a world that had been irrevocably altered. The soldier watched her, a quiet smile playing on his lips. It was a subtle smile, born of shared experience, of mutual understanding, of the quiet strength they had found in each other amidst the chaos of war. The smell of the dried flowers, no longer tinged with the harshness of death, now held a softer, more comforting fragrance. The wood smoke, still present, now seemed less like a reminder of the brutal realities of war and more like a comforting embrace, a source of warmth against the encroaching night. The silence between them, once filled with the weight of grief, now held a different quality, a quiet understanding, a shared space where healing could begin. The rhythmic tapping of Henrietta's beak continued, a steady, comforting sound in the quiet of the night, a gentle lullaby in the heart of war. The darkness outside deepened, but within the small circle of candlelight, a fragile peace had settled, a testament to the enduring power of routine and shared resilience in the face of overwhelming loss. The soldier closed his eyes, a faint smile lingering on his lips. The weight of grief had not disappeared, but it had been tempered by a quiet solace, a shared moment of peace within the unrelenting clamor of war. The world outside remained a landscape of chaos, but within the small space they shared, a flicker of normality had been rekindled, a tiny flame of hope in the darkness. The soldier slept soundly, his breathing slow and even, a rhythm that matched the gentle tapping of Henrietta's beak against the rough-hewn wood of the cart. The candle flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed less menacing now, softened by the pervasive quiet. The air, still carrying the scent of wood smoke and dried flowers, held a new, subtle fragrance, the faint sweetness of the barley and wheat Henrietta was consuming. The metallic tang of the tin container lingered faintly, a ghostly reminder of the soldier's sacrifice. Dawn arrived slowly, painting the eastern sky with pale washes of apricot and rose, the colors reflecting in the dew-kissed petals of the wildflowers outside their makeshift shelter. The news of Henrietta's resilience, her quiet strength in the face of shared grief, spread slowly through the camp, carried on whispered conversations and shared glances. The soldiers, hardened by months of brutal conflict, found themselves strangely touched by the story of the Rhode Island Red Hen. It was a small thing, an almost insignificant detail in the grand scheme of war, but it resonated with them, a quiet counterpoint to the cacophony of violence. A young lieutenant, captivated by the story, saw in Henrietta's unwavering spirit a symbol of their own enduring strength. He suggested to the camp commander, a gruff but fair man, the potential for propaganda. He spoke of using Henrietta's image, a symbol of quiet perseverance, to bolster the morale of the troops back home. The idea was initially met with skepticism, but the lieutenant, with a persistence that mirrored Henrietta's own, eventually persuaded the commander. The first photographs arrived at the makeshift photography studio in the camp, a collection of tents and battered equipment carefully protected from the elements. The photographer, a man whose hands bore the same calluses and scars as many of the soldiers he documented, approached Henrietta with a quiet reverence. The muted click of the camera was a surprisingly gentle sound, almost lost in the omnipresent sounds of the war. He captured her in various poses, pecking at grains of wheat, resting peacefully beside the soldier, her bright red feathers a stark contrast to the muted tones of the battlefield. The grain in her beak caught the light, a small, perfect jewel in the photograph. The subtle, almost imperceptible shift in her gaze, a tilt of her head, a flicker of her eye, was captured perfectly, a quiet intensity that spoke volume. Each photograph held a certain solemnity, a tribute to the quiet power of resilience. The images were meticulously developed, the darkroom lit only by the faint glow of the red lamps, their warmth a contrast to the cool, damp air. The resulting photographs were then sent back to the home front, carefully packaged and protected within layers of soft linen. The journey of these photographs was long and arduous, often subject to the vagaries of war. Yet, each bump in the road, each delay, only served to heighten the anticipation. Upon arrival, the images were carefully examined by the propaganda department, a team of dedicated individuals who understood the power of imagery to touch hearts and minds. The faint, almost imperceptible scent of wood smoke clung to each photograph, a haunting reminder of the harsh realities of the battlefield, a scent that somehow seemed to deepen the impact of the images. Henrietta's story, woven into the tapestry of wartime narratives, became a poignant symbol of enduring strength. Newspapers across the nation carried her image, accompanied by articles that spoke of her quiet fortitude, her unwavering spirit. Her story was simple, yet it resonated with the people, offering a touch of hope in the face of relentless suffering. Posters featuring Henrietta appeared on street corners and in shop windows, her bright feathers a splash of color against the somber backdrop of the war effort. People paused to look at the photograph, drawn to the simple honesty of the image. The texture of the newsprint, its slightly rough surface, spoke of the urgency of the message, a stark contrast to the smoothness of the photograph itself. Children pointed to Henrietta, their innocent eyes reflecting the hope she represented. Mothers, weary and worried, saw in her a glimmer of resilience to sustain them. Fathers, far from home, found comfort in the image of quiet perseverance. Henrietta's story became a symbol of national unity, a touchstone for the emotional toll of the war. The subtle details of the photographs, the texture of her feathers, the glint in her eye, the grain in her beak, became a way for people to connect with the larger narrative of the war, to find a small point of solace amid the chaos. The faint smell of printer's ink, still faintly clinging to newspapers and posters months later, provided a tangible link to Henrietta's story, a subtle reminder of the enduring spirit of hope amidst the darkness of war. Even the distant rumble of distant trains, carrying news and supplies across the country, seemed to carry the echoes of Henrietta's story. Each clack of the wheels a subtle reminder of the quiet strength found in the most unexpected places. The soft rustle of the pages as people turned them to read about Henrietta, the texture of her image beneath their fingertips. These were sensory experiences that shaped the national psyche, subtly strengthening the war effort. The weight of the nation's anxiety found a counterpoint in the gentle weight of the newsprint, and the weight of the war's grief found a solace in the quiet strength of a Rhode Island red hen. The comforting weight of Farmer McGregor's letters arrived much later, carried by a different rhythm altogether, the slower, steadier beat of the postal service, a comforting contrast to the frantic urgency of the battlefield dispatches. The first arrived wrapped in coarse brown paper, the scent of wood smoke still clinging faintly to it, a ghostly reminder of its journey. The paper itself felt rough beneath the fingertips, a tactile echo of the landscape it had traversed. Unfolding it carefully, the lieutenant felt the soft crackle of aged paper, a sound as familiar and comforting as the creak of the old barn back home. The farmer's script was familiar, a spidery scrawl that somehow managed to convey both the firmness of his character and the gentle affection he held for Henrietta. He wrote of the garden, the vibrant green of the peas climbing their trellises, the plump tomatoes ripening on the vine, their skins flushed with a warm summery red. He described the scent of freshly turned earth, rich and earthy, a smell that carried the weight of seasons past and the promise of harvests to come. He mentioned the clucking of the remaining hens, a chorus of sounds that echoed the quiet rhythms of life continuing in his absence. He even included a detailed description of a particularly stubborn rooster, its comb a fiery crimson, its strut a picture of self-importance. The words painted vivid images, calming scenes that offered a stark contrast to the harsh realities of the war. The second letter, arriving a few weeks later, spoke of the changing seasons. The vibrant green of summer had given way to the golden hues of autumn, the leaves turning slowly, their colors shifting from emerald to russet to gold. The crisp air carried the scent of decaying leaves and wood smoke, a melancholy fragrance that somehow felt both nostalgic and comforting. Farmer McGregor detailed the tasks he undertook in the absence of others, the quiet rhythm of his days, filled with the tending of the farm, an act of devotion as much to the land as to the memory of Henrietta. The scratching of his pen on paper echoed the subtle sounds of nature, a soothing counterpoint to the cacophony of war. The paper was thinner than the first, almost delicate, as if the passing of time had subtly altered its texture. He spoke of the animals, their quiet resilience, a mirror of his own. He described the soft warmth of a kitten nestled against his hand, its purr a gentle vibration that resonated deep within his soul. He mentioned the steady rhythm of the cows chewing, a calming sound that held the weight of centuries of peaceful existence. He wrote with a quiet stoicism, a gentle acceptance of the circumstances, and a quiet trust in Henrietta's ability to endure. A third letter arrived weeks later. This one felt heavier, the paper thicker, almost stiff with age. The farmer's words were fewer, more measured, filled with a subtle undercurrent of worry. The scent of wood smoke was stronger this time, a sharper, almost acrid fragrance that spoke of colder days and shorter nights. He described the first snowfall, the quiet accumulation of white, a blanketing silence that somehow amplified the quiet anxieties within him. He spoke of the long evenings, the fire crackling in the hearth, its warmth a poor substitute for Henrietta's presence. The faint smell of wood smoke emanating from the letter blended with the scent of old paper and ink, a poignant mixture that encapsulated the passage of time and the lingering weight of absence. He wrote of his hope, a fragile thing carefully nurtured in the harsh realities of wartime. His hope was tied not only to Henrietta's safe return, but to the eventual return of peace, a return to the simple rhythms of life on the farm. The paper was now worn at the edges, hinting at the many times it had been handled, read, and reread. Each crease and fold told a silent story, a testament to the farmer's unwavering devotion and constant longing. Each letter was a small, precious gift, a beacon of warmth and comfort in the chilling landscape of war. The soldier who received and carefully delivered the letters, a young man named Thomas, with eyes that mirrored Henrietta's gentle, quiet intensity, would often sit beside Henrietta, reading the words aloud, in a hushed whisper, his voice barely audible, above the distant rumble of artillery fire. The rhythmic cadence of his words, the gentle inflection of his tone, created a small oasis of peace within the harsh realities of the battlefield, a sanctuary where time seemed to slow and the weight of the world lifted momentarily. The words were simple, yet they held a profound power, a testament to the enduring strength of love and hope amidst the overwhelming turmoil of war. The weight of the letters, the texture of the paper, the scent of wood smoke and ink, all these small sensory details woven together to create a tapestry of comfort, a reminder of home, a constant source of strength for both Henrietta and Thomas. And in those small moments of shared comfort, amidst the chaos, a faint hope flickered brightly. The faint flicker of hope, nurtured by Farmer McGregor's letters, found a tangible expression one crisp autumn afternoon. The air, still carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, held a peculiar stillness. The usual cacophony of war, the distant rumble of artillery, the sporadic crackle of gunfire, was muted, replaced by an almost unsettling quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating something momentous. Henrietta, perched on a low crate near Thomas, felt the change. The usual tension, a tight knot in her stomach, eased slightly. The weight of the war, always present, felt momentarily less oppressive. Thomas, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, a landscape painted in muted browns and grays, noticed the shift as well. The usual grim set of his jaw softened just a fraction. His usually tightly held rifle rested loosely against his shoulder, the metal cool against his worn uniform. The rhythmic thud of his heart, usually a frantic drumbeat, slowed to a more measured pace. He took a slow, deep breath, the crisp autumn air filling his lungs. A scent of pine carried on the gentle breeze, mingled with the familiar aroma of wood smoke and damp earth, creating a surprisingly comforting blend. He opened one of Farmer McGregor's letters, the worn paper crinkling softly in his hands. The paper, thinned by time and handling, felt almost fragile beneath his fingertips, its texture a comforting reminder of home. He began to read aloud, his voice a low murmur barely audible above the faint rustle of leaves. He described the slow, deliberate process of harvesting the late potatoes, the cool, damp earth clinging to his fingers, the satisfying weight of the potatoes in his basket. He spoke of the sunset, painting the sky in hues of burnt orange and deep crimson, a spectacle of color that contrasted sharply with the grays and browns of the battlefield. The words evoked vivid images: the rich, earthy smell of freshly turned soil, the cool smoothness of a potato against his skin, the vibrant warmth of the setting sun. Henrietta, listening intently, closed her eyes. The words painted a picture of a life untouched by the war, a life of simple rhythms and quiet contentment. She imagined the golden glow of the setting sun, the cool dampness of the earth, the satisfying weight of the potatoes. The images were so vivid, so real, that she almost smelled the cool earth between her claws, almost smelled the rich, earthy scent of freshly turned soil. The tension in her body eased further, replaced by a sense of calm that was both unexpected and deeply comforting. The sounds of the battlefield faded into the background, replaced by the quiet rhythm of Farmer McGregor's words. The faint scent of wood smoke from the letter mingled with the earthy smell of the battlefield, creating an unusual yet strangely soothing olfactory blend. Thomas paused in his reading, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He looked at Henrietta, her eyes closed, her body relaxed. A shared sense of peace settled between them, a fragile bubble of tranquility in the midst of the chaos. He continued reading, his voice soft, soothing, each word carefully chosen, each syllable imbued with a gentle warmth. He described the evening meal, simple yet satisfying, a bowl of steaming stew seasoned with herbs gathered from the garden, the warm glow of the lamplight illuminating the small farmhouse kitchen. He depicted the crackling fire in the hearth, its warmth radiating outwards, chasing away the chill of the evening air. He described the gentle purr of the kitten curled up on his lap, its soft fur a comforting weight against his skin. The details were exquisite, the subtle crackle of the fire, the gentle hiss of the stew as it simmered, the soft purr of the kitten, a rhythmic, hypnotic sound. The sensory details were so rich, so vivid, that Henrietta could almost feel the warmth of the fire, almost taste the stew, almost feel the soft fur of the kitten against her feathers. It was a stark contrast to the harsh realities of her surroundings, the cold, hard ground beneath her feet, the ever-present threat of danger. The sounds of the battlefield, the distant rumble of artillery, the sporadic crackle of gunfire, were almost entirely drowned out by the quiet intimacy of Farmer McGregor's words. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a gentle energy, a peaceful hum that resonated deep within Henrietta's being. Thomas finished reading, his voice barely a whisper. He gently stroked Henrietta's head, his touch light but reassuring. The shared silence that followed was not empty or unnerving, but rather full of a quiet understanding, a profound sense of connection. It was a shared moment of peace, a precious oasis of calm in the heart of a raging storm. The sun, slowly sinking below the horizon, cast long shadows across the battlefield, painting the landscape in hues of amber and gold. The colors, normally harsh and unsettling, seemed gentler now, softened by the quiet serenity of the moment. The scent of wood smoke and damp earth hung heavy in the air, a melancholic yet comforting fragrance. For a long, drawn-out moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the gentle whisper of the wind rustling through the nearby trees, a sound so soft, so subtle, it barely registered. The quiet was profound, a stark contrast to the usual cacophony of war. It was a moment of respite, a brief reprieve from the relentless onslaught of violence and fear. It was a moment of shared humanity, a connection forged in the crucible of war, a testament to the enduring power of love and hope. A moment, precious and fleeting, yet deeply significant. A quiet, peaceful interlude, etched in the memory. A promise of a future where such moments would no longer be exceptional, but commonplace. A fragile hope, as delicate as the thin, worn pages of Farmer McGregor's letters, bloomed anew in the heart of the war. The fragile hope, delicate as the thin, worn pages of Farmer McGregor's letters, took root in Henrietta's heart. It wasn't a sudden blossoming, but a slow, steady growth, like a stubborn seedling pushing through hardened earth. The warmth of Thomas's hand on her head lingered, a comforting pressure against her feathers. The scent of wood smoke, earth, and something subtly sweet, perhaps a trace of the stew Thomas had described, clung to the air, a comforting blanket against the chill of the evening. The sun dipped further below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep violet and fading rose. The colors, once harsh and jarring, now seemed softer, more muted, like watercolors gently blending on canvas. The sounds of the battlefield, once a constant barrage of noise, retreated further into the distance, replaced by the whispering wind in the trees, the rustling of leaves, a soft, sibilant symphony. Henrietta felt a shift within her. It wasn't a dramatic change, but a subtle realignment, a quiet settling. The constant tension that had gripped her, the knot of fear in her stomach, slowly began to unwind. The weight of the war, the relentless pressure, seemed to lessen, as if the earth beneath her feet had become slightly softer, more yielding. She opened her eyes slowly, cautiously, like a flower unfolding in the first light of dawn. The battlefield still stretched before her, a desolate landscape of mud and trenches, but the harshness was somehow softened, veiled by the gentle hues of twilight. The distant explosions still punctuated the quiet, but they were less immediate, less threatening, as if heard through a thick curtain of sound. Thomas remained beside her, his presence a silent reassurance. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The shared silence was not empty, but filled with a quiet understanding, a connection forged in the crucible of war. He sat, watching the last vestiges of sunlight sink behind the distant hills, the image mirrored in the gentle curve of Henrietta's calm eye. The cool night air brushed against Henrietta's feathers, a refreshing caress after the long, oppressive heat of the day. The subtle scent of damp earth mingled with the wood smoke, creating a unique olfactory landscape, melancholic, yet strangely calming. She felt the earth beneath her claws, a cool, damp firmness. It reminded her of the feel of the earth in her home coop, the rich, fertile soil where she had scratched and pecked, searching for seeds and worms. The memory brought a wave of nostalgia, a yearning for simpler times. The memory wasn't just a fleeting image, it was a feeling, a visceral recollection. She remembered the warmth of the sun on her feathers, the satisfying crunch of seeds beneath her beak, the comfort of the familiar henhouse. She recalled the clucking of her sisters, the comforting routine of their daily lives. The memories were a source of strength, a reminder of her resilience, her ability to survive. The next morning, the sun rose, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. The air was crisp and clean, washed clean by the night's rain. The sounds of the battlefield were still present, but they seemed less intrusive, less overwhelming. Henrietta felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet determination that surprised even herself. The war was still raging, the danger still very real, but she felt a strength she hadn't felt before, a resilience born of memory and hope. Thomas rose, stretching and yawning, a slight smile playing on his lips. He looked down at Henrietta, and she met his gaze. In that look, there was a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of their shared experience, their bond forged in the unlikely crucible of war. He offered her a piece of hardtack, the stale biscuit crumbling slightly in his hand. Henrietta pecked at it cautiously, then ate it with a renewed appetite, the taste strangely comforting. The simple act of eating felt significant, a reaffirmation of life, a quiet rebellion against the harsh realities of war. Throughout the day, Henrietta moved with a newfound confidence. She searched for scraps of food with a determined energy, her movements sharp and purposeful. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving, finding strength in the smallest of things, in the simple act of finding sustenance, in the quiet companionship of Thomas. The days that followed were still filled with the sights and sounds of war, but Henrietta's perspective had shifted. The fear remained, but it no longer consumed her. She found strength in the memories of her past, in the quiet moments of connection with Thomas, in the simple act of survival. The images from Farmer McGregor's letters, the warm glow of the setting sun, the cool earth beneath her claws, the comforting weight of the potatoes, became anchors, grounding her in the present, reminding her of a life beyond the battlefield. The colors of the battlefield, once bleak and monochrome, started to acquire subtle shades, reflecting the spectrum of her renewed hope. Even the mud seemed less oppressive, its texture less repulsive. The air, while still filled with the acrid scent of gunpowder and smoke, held the faint persistent scent of the earth, a grounding reminder of her past, a tangible link to the life she longed to reclaim. The sounds of battle were still present, yet she now perceived them as a distant, almost rhythmic background hum, rather than an immediate, suffocating threat. The small acts of kindness and shared quiet moments between her and Thomas had strengthened an unbreakable bond. This was no longer a soldier and a chicken, but a friendship forged in the crucible of war. A quiet testament to resilience, hope, and an unexpected kind of comfort found in the most unlikely of places. The war continued, but within Henrietta's heart a quiet strength bloomed, a tenacious resilience fueled by memory, hope, and the steadfast friendship of a kind and compassionate human soul. The dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pale apricot and rose, a gentle contrast to the steel gray of the approaching storm. The air, still carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, now held a sharper tang, a metallic whisper hinting at the coming conflict. Henrietta felt it in the stillness before the tempest, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a tightening of the air itself. She nestled closer to Thomas, seeking the warmth of his presence, the reassuring solidity of his presence, a comfort against the growing unease. His hand, calloused yet gentle, rested lightly on her feathers, a silent promise of protection. The sounds of the battlefield, usually a chaotic symphony of explosions and shouts, were muted, replaced by a low, ominous hum, a deep thrumming that vibrated through the ground, resonating in Henrietta's very bones. She could feel the anticipation, the tension coiling around them, a palpable energy that hung heavy in the air. Even the usually boisterous crows seemed subdued, their calls replaced by a hush, almost nervous chirping. The light grew stronger, revealing the vast expanse of the battlefield stretching before them, a desolate landscape scarred by trenches and craters, a testament to the relentless brutality of war. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight, illuminated in the ethereal glow, each particle a tiny, silent witness to the impending clash. Thomas checked his rifle, the metallic click a sharp counterpoint to the otherwise muted soundscape. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his movements deliberate and precise, each action a testament to his training, his experience. The sight of him, so calm amidst the gathering storm, filled Henrietta with a strange sense of peace. His quiet confidence was contagious, a silent reassurance that spread through her, settling the fluttering in her heart. He offered her a small piece of dried apple, a rare treat, its sweetness a tiny beacon of hope in the growing darkness. The taste was sharp and tangy, a burst of flavor that momentarily eclipsed the metallic taste of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. The first explosions echoed in the distance, a low rumble that gradually intensified, growing into a deafening roar. The earth trembled beneath their feet, a violent shudder that sent a wave of panic through Henrietta. She instinctively huddled closer to Thomas, seeking the safety of his presence. The air grew thick with the smell of gunpowder, acrid and suffocating, a choking cloud that seemed to press down on them, stealing the breath from her lungs. The sounds of battle became a cacophony of explosions, screams, and the metallic clang of weapons, a relentless onslaught that threatened to overwhelm her senses. Yet amidst the chaos, Henrietta found a surprising stillness within herself. The memories of her past, the familiar sense of the coop, the feel of the earth beneath her claws, the warmth of the sun on her feathers, all these flooded back, creating a protective shield against the horrors unfolding around her. They were anchors, grounding her in the present, reminding her of a life beyond the battlefield, a life of simplicity and peace. The battle raged on, a relentless maelstrom of destruction and death. The sounds were overwhelming, but Henrietta focused on the smaller details. The texture of the earth beneath her claws, the rough feel of the canvas of Thomas's coat against her feathers, the subtle rhythm of his breathing as he fought alongside his comrades. These were the things that kept her grounded, the things that reminded her that life, even amidst the chaos of war, continued. She watched as Thomas moved with grace and precision through the chaos, his every movement measured and purposeful. His eyes, though filled with grim determination, held a flicker of hope, a tenacious refusal to give in to despair. His resolve, his quiet courage, mirrored the quiet strength within Henrietta herself. The hours stretched into an eternity, each moment filled with the deafening roar of explosions, the chilling cries of men, the acrid stench of death. Yet, amidst the carnage, Henrietta found pockets of peace. The shared glance with Thomas, the brief moments of quiet amidst the chaos, the subtle comfort of his hand resting gently on her feathers. These quiet moments, these small acts of kindness, were beacons of hope, reminders of the human spirit's ability to endure, to find solace even in the darkest of times. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the ravaged landscape. The battle still raged, but the light began to fade, a quiet surrender to the night. The air grew heavy with the scent of blood and smoke, a thick, cloying fog that threatened to suffocate her. Henrietta huddled close to Thomas, finding comfort in his warmth, his steady presence a reassuring constant in the chaos that swirled around them. The final push was coming, the final offensive. The air vibrated with an anticipation almost palpable. The very earth beneath them seemed to hold its breath. The final push began not with a roar, but a subtle shift, a change in the rhythm of the explosions, a slight lessening of the overall volume, replaced by a more focused, intense barrage concentrated in a specific sector. The earth trembled more violently now, a deep, resonant groan that seemed to emanate from the very core of the planet. Dust, thick and ochre-colored, swirled around Henrietta, coating her feathers in a fine, gritty film. She could taste it, a dry, earthy tang on her beak. Thomas's hand remained firm on her feathers, a comforting weight against her side. His breathing, though deeper now, remained steady, a controlled rhythm in the maelstrom of sound. She felt the tension in his muscles, the slight tremor in his hand, but his eyes, though narrowed in concentration, held a calm focus. He was a rock in a storm, his presence a silent anchor in the chaos. The air grew thick with the smell of cordite, sharp and biting, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. The cries of men, once a chaotic chorus, now seemed more distinct, closer. Each shout, each groan, each desperate cry for help carried on the wind, weaving a macabre tapestry of human suffering. Yet, amidst the carnage, Henrietta focused on the small things, the feel of the rough canvas of Thomas's coat against her feathers, the texture of the dried mud clinging to her claws, the subtle shift in the wind as a nearby shell exploded. She saw a flash of movement, a blur of khaki and steel, as a soldier stumbled, his body crumpling to the earth. He didn't scream, there was simply a soft thud. A sigh of expiring breath lost in the overall tumult. The image, though brief, etched itself into Henrietta's memory, a stark reminder of the fragility of life. The ground vibrated constantly now, a relentless pulse that throbbed through her very being. She felt the impact of distant explosions as low, guttural rumbles in her chest. The tremors grew stronger, closer, the earth shaking violently beneath her feet, as if a giant beast were struggling beneath the surface. Small stones and pebbles rained down around them, propelled by the force of the blasts. Thomas shifted slightly, his body tensing as he moved to a new position, his rifle held steady. His movements were economical, precise, each action calculated and controlled. He spoke little, his words brief, clipped commands lost in the roar of battle. His eyes, however, never left the battlefield, scanning the horizon, assessing the situation. The sun, sinking towards the horizon, cast long, stretching shadows, painting the landscape in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. The light was fading fast, leaving behind a growing twilight that only served to intensify the fear and uncertainty. The air grew colder, a chill that seeped into Henrietta's bones, despite the warmth of Thomas's body pressed close to hers. The sounds of battle slowly began to fade, morphing from a chaotic roar into a series of distinct, yet increasingly fainter sounds. The distant rumble of artillery, the sporadic crackle of gunfire, the occasional desperate cry, each sound fading like a whisper on the wind. The silence that followed was not a peaceful silence, but a heavy, expectant silence, filled with the lingering scent of smoke, blood, and cordite. A silence pregnant with the weight of what had transpired, the cost of the battle. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, thick and still, heavy with the unspoken knowledge of loss. The earth, still trembling slightly, slowly settled, returning to its uneasy rest, the sun now completely hidden behind the horizon, left behind a sky streaked with the colors of a fading day. The faint glow of stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their distant light offering a small, fragile glimmer of hope in the oppressive darkness. Thomas relaxed slightly, the tension slowly draining from his body. He reached into his pocket, producing a small, crumpled piece of bread, and offered it to Henrietta. She pecked at it gently, the taste almost imperceptible amidst the lingering taste of dust and fear. She felt his hand on her feathers, a gentle caress, a silent reassurance. The night settled upon the battlefield, a cloak of darkness descending upon the ravaged land. The moon, a pale disk in the inky sky, cast long, ghostly shadows, transforming the desolate landscape into a surreal and eerie spectacle. The sounds of the night, the chirping of crickets, the distant howl of a dog, were muted, almost hushed, as if nature itself were mourning the loss of life. Henrietta nestled closer to Thomas, finding comfort in the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. She closed her eyes, her mind replaying the day's events in slow motion, the sights, the smells, the sounds, the feelings, a kaleidoscope of sensory impressions etched deeply into her memory. She felt a profound sense of weariness, a bone-deep fatigue that settled over her, a welcome respite from the emotional toll of the day. Despite the horror she had witnessed, despite the constant threat of danger, she found a surprising calmness, a quiet acceptance of her place in the midst of the chaos. She was safe, for now. Thomas was near, his presence a steady, unwavering source of strength and reassurance in the heart of the ravaged battlefield. The night held its breath, and so did she, preparing for the uncertainties of the morrow. The first light of dawn crept across the ravaged landscape, painting the sky in soft pastels of pink and gray. It was a gentler light than the harsh glare of the previous day, a light that seemed to hold a promise of peace. Henrietta felt the change, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The tremor in the earth had ceased, the heavy silence of the night replaced by a quieter, more contemplative stillness. The air, still thick with the scent of smoke and damp earth, held a new fragrance, the delicate, almost imperceptible perfume of dew-kissed grass. She felt Thomas stir beside her, the slow, deliberate movement of his body, a comforting reassurance. He sat up, his silhouette stark against the brightening sky. His hand, calloused and strong, reached out and gently stroked her feathers. The touch was warm, grounding, a familiar comfort in the unfamiliar landscape. He didn't speak, but his presence was a quiet strength, a silent affirmation of survival. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, a warmth spreading through her, chasing away the lingering chill of the night. The rising sun warmed her feathers, a gentle caress that eased the tension in her muscles. She stretched her neck, feeling the stiffness ease, the slow, deliberate extension of her limbs, a balm to her weary body. He stood, a tall, imposing figure silhouetted against the emerging light, his rifle resting on his shoulder. He looked out across the battlefield, a vast expanse of destruction stretching as far as the eye could see. The scene was one of desolation, but amidst the rubble and the ruin, there was a different kind of stillness, a quiet that spoke of something more profound than merely the absence of gunfire. The air, though still heavy with the scent of cordite, held the faint whisper of a new beginning. There was a sense of suspended animation, a moment of fragile peace hanging in the balance. He moved slowly, methodically, his eyes scanning the landscape, searching for signs of movement, of life. He walked with a measured pace, his boots crunching softly on the broken ground, the sound almost musical in the quiet morning. The feel of the cold earth beneath her claws reminded Henrietta of the coldness she had felt the day before, but it felt different now, less threatening, somehow cleansed. The remnants of the battle were still horrifying to see, the scattered debris, the pockmarked earth, the twisted metal, but there was an absence of the palpable dread, the imminent threat of sudden death that had pervaded the air only hours before. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the battlefield, other figures emerged from the shadows, other soldiers emerging from their temporary shelters and fortifications. They moved slowly, cautiously, their faces etched with exhaustion and the raw wounds of war. Their movements were hesitant, their eyes filled with a weariness that mirrored Henrietta's own. The morning silence was punctuated by the occasional cough, the groan of pain, or the soft exchange of words. The language was unfamiliar, but the tone of the voices, quiet, grave, devoid of the intensity of the day before, was unmistakable. The air was filled with a palpable sense of relief, a collective sigh of exhaustion and gratitude. It wasn't jubilation, not yet, but a cautious hope, a tentative optimism emerging from the depths of despair. The sound of distant voices grew stronger, the rhythmic murmur of voices slowly coalescing into a deeper, more sustained hum. Thomas turned, his eyes meeting Henrietta's. A faint smile played on his lips, a small, almost imperceptible movement of his mouth. But it spoke volumes. The tension in his body visibly eased, his posture softening, his movements less guarded. He knelt, offering her a piece of biscuit, this one slightly softer, less crumbly than the bread of the previous night. She ate it slowly, savoring the taste, a simple pleasure in the midst of profound change. The sun warmed her, the gentle breeze stirred her feathers, and the sounds of the world, the distant calls of birds, the soft rustle of leaves, the murmur of the returning soldiers, formed a gentle lullaby. It was a sound of homecoming, of relief, of the quiet aftermath of a devastating storm. She felt a profound sense of peace, a deep relaxation settling over her, a sense of stillness that settled into her very bones. The war was over. The armistice had come. The long night was finally over, and in the soft, gentle light of dawn, she found rest. The journey home began not with a burst of speed, but with a slow, deliberate step. Thomas gathered a small bundle of belongings, a worn blanket, a half-empty canteen, and a few scraps of food, before carefully lifting Henrietta into his arms. Her body felt light, almost weightless against his chest. The warmth of his skin seeped through the thin fabric of his shirt, a comforting sensation against the chill of the early morning air. He adjusted his grip, ensuring her comfort, a silent promise of safety. The first few miles were the hardest. The landscape, scarred by the recent conflict, presented a treacherous path. The ground, uneven and littered with the debris of war, demanded slow, careful progress. Each step was a measured action, a mindful consideration of the terrain. Thomas's boots crunched softly on the shattered earth, the sound muffled by the stillness of the morning. The air, still thick with the scent of smoke and cordite, gradually yielded to the gentler fragrances of damp earth and decaying leaves. The rising sun, a pale disk in the eastern sky, cast long shadows that danced and shifted with their movement. Henrietta, nestled securely in Thomas's arms, felt the warmth on her feathers, a gentle caress that soothed her weary body. She closed her eyes, the rhythmic sway of Thomas's gait lulling her into a state of quiet contemplation. The sounds of the battlefield, the distant cries of birds, the whisper of the wind rustling through the shattered trees, faded into a gentle hum, a soothing background to the quiet rhythm of their journey. As they moved further from the ravaged landscape, the air grew cleaner, lighter. The scent of smoke gave way to the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil, the sweet perfume of wildflowers, tenacious enough to bloom in the ravaged fields. The sound of Thomas's boots, once muffled by debris, now echoed lightly against the more solid ground. The occasional glint of sunlight on a dewdrop, the soft chirp of a distant insect, were small details that punctuated the quiet journey, subtle markers of their progress towards home. The pace was deliberate, unhurried. There was no need for haste, no pressure of time. The urgency of battle had given way to a profound sense of calm. Each step was a moment of quiet reflection, a chance to absorb the subtle changes in the landscape, the gradual shift from devastation to renewal. Thomas occasionally paused to rest, his breath coming in slow, even gasps. He would sit on a fallen log, his hand gently stroking Henrietta's feathers, his presence a silent reassurance. The sun climbed higher, casting a golden light on the landscape. The distant rumble of vehicles, the occasional distant call, marked their progress towards civilization. Slowly, they began to encounter other soldiers, their movements equally measured and cautious. There were nods of recognition, brief exchanges of words, gestures of shared experience, silent acknowledgments of mutual survival. The faces were weary, but the eyes held a flicker of hope, a nascent optimism that mirrored Henrietta's own growing sense of relief. The sight of the first farmhouse, a small, humble structure nestled amongst rolling hills, was a profound moment. It was not a grand spectacle, but a symbol of sanctuary, of home. Henrietta felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of relief and anticipation. The familiar scent of hay and earth, the gentle murmur of farm animals in the distance, were welcome sounds, a comforting prelude to the peace she craved. As they drew closer, the sounds intensified, the lowing of cows, the bleating of sheep, the clucking of chickens, a symphony of rural life that filled Henrietta with a sense of profound contentment. The scene before her was a vibrant tapestry of green, brown, and gold, a stark contrast to the gray monotony of the battlefield. The colors were vivid, alive, a testament to the resilience of nature, its capacity to heal and renew even in the face of destruction. The approach to the farm was slow, deliberate. Thomas moved carefully, pausing occasionally to allow Henrietta to adjust to the unfamiliar sights and sounds. The air grew richer, filled with the familiar earthy scent of the soil, the pungent aroma of manure, the sweet perfume of blossoming flowers. The sounds were comforting, the soft patter of rain on leaves, the gentle bleating of lambs, the rhythmic clucking of hens. It was the sound of life returning, of healing, of renewal. Finally, they arrived at the farmhouse. Thomas carefully placed Henrietta down, her claws gently touching the cool, damp earth. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the setting sun, and pecked his hand gently in gratitude. The weight of the journey, the trauma of war, seemed to lift away with that small gesture. It was over. She was home. The long night was finally done. Peace descended like a gentle, soothing blanket, enveloping her in a warm, comforting embrace. The soft, quiet sounds of the farm created a lullaby, calming and settling, and Henrietta felt herself slipping into a deep, restorative sleep. The scent of freshly turned earth and the distant clucking of her brethren eased her into the peaceful darkness, finally, truly at rest. The farmhouse door creaked open, revealing a sliver of warm light and the comforting murmur of voices. Martha, Thomas's mother, stood silhouetted in the doorway, her figure framed by the soft glow emanating from within. Her face, etched with the lines of worry and countless sunrises, softened as her eyes fell upon them. A slow, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. The scent of baking bread, a familiar and comforting aroma, wafted out, mingling with the earthy smells of the farm. Thomas stepped forward, Henrietta nestled securely under his arm. The weight of her felt strangely light now, devoid of the burdens of the battlefield. Martha's hand reached out, gently stroking Henrietta's feathers. Her touch was hesitant at first, then firm with a quiet affection. A low murmuring sound escaped her lips, a wordless greeting, a silent acknowledgement of Henrietta's safe return. The interior of the farmhouse was warm and inviting, a comforting haven after the harsh realities of war. The air was thick with the comforting smells of wood smoke, baking bread, and freshly brewed tea. The rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock filled the spaces between the soft murmurs of conversation. The fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The light was soft, diffused, creating a serene and peaceful atmosphere. Henrietta, perched on a stool near the hearth, felt the warmth radiating from the flames, a comforting counterpoint to the lingering chill of the late autumn air. She watched, mesmerized, as the flames flickered and danced, their movements a hypnotic rhythm that lulled her into a state of peaceful contemplation. The sounds of the farm, the lowing of cows, the bleating of sheep, the contented clucking of hens, created a gentle symphony of rural life, a soothing balm to her war-torn soul. Martha moved about the kitchen with practiced ease, her movements fluid and graceful. The gentle clinking of crockery, the soft rustle of fabric, the low hum of conversation, all contributed to the overall sense of peace and tranquility. She placed a bowl of warm, creamy porridge before Henrietta, along with a small dish of finely chopped vegetables. Henrietta pecked tentatively at the food, savoring the familiar tastes, the comforting textures. The meal was simple, unpretentious, yet it was a feast after the meager rations of the battlefield. Thomas sat opposite her, his face etched with a quiet satisfaction. He watched her eat, his gaze filled with a mixture of relief and affection. He reached out and gently stroked her feathers, his touch a silent reassurance. The silence between them was not awkward or uncomfortable, but rather a comfortable companion, filled with unspoken words and shared experiences. As the evening deepened, the farmhouse grew quieter. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long, flickering shadows across the room. The only sounds were the gentle crackling of the fire, the soft ticking of the clock, and the occasional murmur of conversation. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, creating a soothing lullaby. Later, tucked away in a warm, straw-lined nest in the henhouse, Henrietta felt the soft earth beneath her feathers. The scent of hay and earth filled her senses, a familiar and comforting aroma. The gentle clucking of her fellow hens, a familiar sound, filled the night air. The weight of the journey, the horrors of war, seemed distant, unreal, as if a bad dream from which she had finally awakened. The feeling of peace, of being home, enveloped her completely. The quiet of the night was broken only by the soft sounds of the farm, the occasional rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the gentle murmur of the wind. These sounds, once jarring and disruptive, now held a comforting rhythm. They were the sounds of home, of safety, of peace. Thomas, having settled Henrietta for the night, paused by her nest, watching her for a moment. The relief on his face was palpable. He could see the lingering stress in the way her feathers settled, the slightest tremor remaining in her small body. He knew it would take time, but she was home. That was enough for now. The war was far away, the journey long past, and the present was simply the comforting presence of the farm, a warm haven. The simple routine would soothe her further, the routine itself, a comforting rhythm of sunrises and sunsets. A sense of calm settled over the farm as the stars appeared in the night sky, their distant light shining down on the small, humble farmhouse. The sounds of the night blended together, creating a tranquil symphony that soothed Henrietta's weary soul and lulled her into a deep, restorative sleep. Her dreams were filled with the warmth of the hearth, the comforting scent of hay, and the gentle clucking of her fellow hens. The memory of the war, the harsh reality of conflict, faded into a distant hum, a background noise to the peaceful symphony of rural life. She was safe, she was home, and she was at peace. The long journey was over. The sleepless nights of battle were finally replaced with the tranquility of the farm. She slept soundly, content. The long night was finally over, and morning would come with its gentle promise of a new day and a new beginning. The sun, a pale disk rising over the horizon, cast long shadows across the sleeping farm. The first rays touched Henrietta's feathers, warming her gently. She stirred, a soft clucking escaping her beak, the sound barely disturbing the quiet stillness of the morning. The scent of dew-kissed grass drifted through the open henhouse door, mingling with the earthy aroma of the straw. She stretched, her small body unfolding slowly, luxuriously. The familiar comfort of home, of the rhythmic routine, settled over her. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The memory of the war, the grim reality of the trenches slowly faded, becoming a muted background hum to the vibrant symphony of farm life. Henrietta, though bearing the silent scars of her extraordinary journey, found solace in the simple pleasures. The taste of fresh earthworms, the feel of sun-warm dust beneath her claws, the comforting weight of her flock around her, these were the building blocks of her new, peaceful existence. Thomas continued to watch over her, his care a gentle, unwavering presence. Martha, too, kept a watchful eye, always ensuring Henrietta had the best of the feed, a soft spot in the henhouse, away from the harsher weather. Her legacy, however, was not confined to the quiet routines of the farm. Word of Henrietta, the Rhode Island Red, who served in the Great War, spread, slowly, carried on the winds that whispered through the fields. Initially, it was a hushed murmur, a tale shared in hushed tones in the local pub. Then, as time passed, the story grew. It was embellished, of course. Facts became folklore, details morphed into legend. Henrietta, the brave little hen who had witnessed the horrors of war, became a symbol of resilience, a testament to the unwavering spirit even in the smallest of creatures. Children, drawn by the whispers of the tale, would visit the farm, their eyes wide with wonder as they peered at Henrietta, clucking contentedly in her nest. They would whisper to each other, imagining her charging across no man's land, her tiny claws digging into the mud, her feathered body dodging flying shrapnel. They saw in her a symbol of bravery beyond measure, a courage that transcended species. Their parents, sharing knowing glances, recounted the story, their voices filled with a gentle respect for this extraordinary hen. The tale of Henrietta transcended the boundaries of the farm, migrating to the local newspaper, then to regional publications. She became a curiosity, a subject of fascination. Letters poured in from across the country, from people who sought to know more about the small hen who had, against all odds, survived the Great War. Some letters were filled with gratitude, their writers expressing their admiration for her courage and her unwavering spirit. Others were filled with awe, their authors amazed by the remarkable tale of a chicken that had found its way onto the battlefield. Artists, inspired by Henrietta's story, created paintings and drawings. Poets wrote verses celebrating her bravery, using her story as a metaphor for the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. The image of a small Rhode Island red hen amidst the carnage of war became a powerful and poignant symbol, capturing the imagination of millions. Henrietta, the simple farm hen, had become an icon. Even in the quiet moments, amidst the familiar routine of farm life, the echoes of her extraordinary journey remained, the faintest tremor in her feathers as she settled down at night, a slight hesitancy in her step when a loud sound startled her. These were small reminders of the battles fought, the sacrifices endured, yet these were also reminders of her triumph, of her return to peace, to the gentle rhythm of home. The comforting weight of her fellow hens, the soft warmth of the sun on her feathers, the familiar taste of the food from Martha's hands, these were the counterpoint to the memories of war. They were the quiet reassurances that home, after such a journey, was everything. The simple act of pecking at her feed, of basking in the afternoon sun, of nesting amongst her flock, these became acts of defiance against the shadow of her past. They were affirmations of life, of survival, of the enduring strength of the spirit. Henrietta's legacy was not etched in stone or carved in marble. It was woven into the fabric of the rural landscape, into the collective memory of a small community, whispered on the winds, carried on the wings of birds, and celebrated in the hearts of those who heard her tale. It was a legacy of resilience, courage, and the indomitable spirit of one small hen, a testament to the unexpected strength found in the most humble of creatures. Her story became a gentle reminder, a soothing balm to those who had also experienced loss and trauma. It was a story of peace found after the storm, of the quiet triumph of the everyday over the extraordinary horror of war. It was a story whispered into the long, peaceful nights of the farm, a story told under the starry sky, a story carried gently on the wind into the future. And in the quiet, contented clucking of the hens, in the warmth of the farmhouse hearth, in the gentle rhythm of farm life, Henrietta's legacy lived on. It was a legacy not of bloodshed and battle, but of peace, resilience, and the enduring power of the human and avian spirit.